Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case, the case of Laverne Kay Parsons. Laverne Kay Parsons and Rebecca Sears were neighbors who developed a strong friendship, becoming almost like sisters. Rebecca had a good relationship with both Laverne and her husband, David Parsons. However, their bond evolved into a mutual dependence that hinted at deeper issues. This marked the beginning of a troubling story that would have a significant impact on their entire town. In Grovetown, Georgia, USA, a worker called the emergency services. The dispatcher reported that the front door of the Parsons home was damaged, which looked like a break-in. Concerned about a crime, the worker alerted the police. When officers arrived, they found the house open and moved toward the garage. Inside, they discovered the front door smeared with blood, along with large amounts of blood on the walls and floor. In the middle of the garage, there was a woman's body, so badly mutilated that it looked as if she had been attacked by a bear. As the investigation unfolded, more horrific details about the incident emerged. In the spring of 2005, the Parsons family relocated to Grovetown, Georgia. This small town, with a population of about 15,000, was known for its peaceful and friendly atmosphere, making it one of the safest places in the state. The family, consisting of husband David, wife Laverne, and their 12-year-old son, had just settled into their new home. David, a career military man, had recently retired and was now working for a logistics. David and Laverne had been in love since high school, starting their relationship when Laverne was 17. Now, as a family with a growing son, they were filled with hope for their future in this community. Shortly after the Parsons moved in, they met their new neighbors, Tony and Rebecca Sears, who lived next door. The Sears family had 5 children, 2 of whom were adults from Rebecca's previous marriage. Rebecca worked as a manager at a medical center, while Tony was a truck driver. They had lived in the area for most of their lives and were known for being friendly and kind. Rebecca's older sons, Michael and Christopher Bowers, had taken different paths in life. Christopher, who had a stable job at the same clinic as his mother, lived independently and spent his free time on his motorcycle. In contrast, Michael struggled with serious substance abuse issues. He often faced difficulties and had trouble finding work, relying on his parents for support while living at home. Despite this, Rebecca consistently helped him by bringing him to her office, where he occasionally found odd jobs, such as mowing lawns or taking out the trash, earning small tips for his work. During one of the office visits, some money went missing. The management suspected Michael, who had a troubled past and struggled with addiction, of stealing it. Although they couldn't prove anything, and he was not formally charged, the situation cast a shadow over the Sears family. This is a common issue in small towns. Everyone knows each other's business, and even minor troubles can spark rumors. Despite this, the friendship between the new neighbors, who were unaware of the Sears family's difficulties, continued to grow. After they moving in, Rebecca helped her new friend find a job at the physical therapy office, which brought them closer together. They began to spend a lot of time together, enjoying daily conversations and bonding. Later, the whole group went on a cruise where they played doubles tennis, becoming best friends and nearly inseparable. Everything seemed perfect until a tragedy struck in 2009, revealing the true nature of the deceitful criminal hiding behind the facade of a respectable person. Laverne started receiving anonymous text messages on her phone suggesting that her husband was cheating on her with her best friend, Rebecca. Laverne brought this up with Rebecca, but Rebecca dismissed it as a bad joke. Despite Rebecca's denial, the rumors spread, and soon everyone in town was talking about it. Laverne then confronted her husband to discover the truth, but he denied any wrongdoing. However, this still unsettled Laverne and distressed her. Although they had previously enjoyed a good relationship, mistrust began to grow after the messages. Later, Rebecca felt guilty and confessed to her husband that she had indeed been having an affair with their neighbor. She reassured him that it was over and took responsibility for her actions, admitting that the affair had lasted several months. Rebecca apologized to her husband, believing that by doing so, she was easing her conscience. She failed to realize that her husband would be shocked by the revelation and wouldn't simply overlook it. After hearing Rebecca's confession, her husband called Laverne to tell her about his wife's infidelity, revealing that Rebecca had cheated on him with Laverne's husband. Laverne confronted her husband and told him that she had discovered his lie. David apologized, wanting to save their marriage for their son's sake, and she forgave him. Afterward, Laverne decided to quit her job to avoid seeing her husband's mistress and cut off all communication with their neighbors. She even considered selling their house to move far away from the Sears family and start fresh. However, after the house was listed for sale, a series of events began to unfold with tragic results. About a month passed without any contact between the former best friends. During this time, David was on a business trip in California. One evening, he called his wife, but after a short conversation, he broke down and called their neighbor, Rebecca. He confessed to her that he still had feelings for her and wanted to be with her. Their conversation quickly turned into flirting and then phone intimate. Unknowingly, David triggered a series of events that would lead to serious consequences. The next morning, March 25, 2009, David called his wife, but she didn't answer. This was unusual because she was not working that day and was usually home. After several attempts to reach Laverne, he called her friend Tamara to see if she knew where Laverne was, but Tamara had no information. He then called Rebecca, but she said she also hadn't heard from Laverne. Hours passed without any contact. That morning, a repairman arrived at the Parsons house to complete a repair. He knocked on the front door, but no one answered. He tried calling the homeowner's mobile phones, but they didn't respond. Concerned, he went around to the back door and noticed that the glass was broken, with shards scattered on the floor, and there were visible bloodstains just inside the door. Realizing that something was wrong, the repairman chose not to enter the house and instead called emergency services. Within minutes, the nearest police patrol and ambulance arrived. When the officers entered the house, they followed the blood trails on the floor, which led them to the garage. There, they found Laverne lying in a pool of blood, with a bloody hammer and baseball bat next to her. The paramedics detected a faint pulse and quickly transported her to the hospital's intensive care unit, where doctors worked to save her life. The police investigated the crime scene and found no evidence of abuse assault on the victim. However, several valuable items, including a gold necklace and a watch, were missing, and the house was in chaos. The bedroom mattress had been overturned, and all the drawers were pulled out. Notably, cash and other valuables were left untouched, leading the police to conclude that this was not a typical burglary, as real burglars usually take cash. It appeared that the scene of the struggle had been staged, so investigators considered it a violent attack with the intent to kill rather than a robbery. A woman was intentionally attacked in her home, shocking the detectives with the brutality of the crime. Later, a neighbor named Rebecca called the police to report a burglary at her house. Fortunately, Rebecca and her family were not home, and nothing was stolen. It seemed the burglar had been frightened off and left without taking anything. This raised questions for the detectives. Could this incident really have been a simple burglary? Meanwhile, Laverne was fighting for her life in the hospital, and the police hoped she would recover enough to provide information about her attacker. Unfortunately, her injuries were too severe, and the doctors were not optimistic about her recovery. Her husband was informed of the attack and rushed to the hospital. When he arrived, doctors told him she had no chance of waking up and could only be kept alive by machines. After careful consideration, he made the painful decision to turn off his wife's life support. Laverne, 41, died in the hospital just a day after the emergency call was made. The first person the police interrogated was the repairman who discovered the break-in at the house and called for emergency services. This incident occurred at 8:30 in the morning, which seemed unusually early for such work to the detectives. Raising their suspicions, they found it odd that he was walking around the house, especially since he shouldn't have been attempting to enter through the back door. The police brought him in for questioning. The worker explained that he arrived early because that was the time agreed upon with Laverne, and he went to the back door because that was where he was scheduled to work. The Parsons family were preparing to tidy up parts of the house before selling it. The repairman passed the polygraph test, and his testimony was convincing, so he was quickly cleared as a suspect. However, he did provide the police with an important lead. While speaking with the emergency dispatcher, he noticed a suspicious young man sitting on the curb across the street from the house. When the police arrived, this young man mentioned that his house had also been robbed. The officers recognized him as 22-year-old Michael Bowers, Rebecca's eldest son, and confirmed that there were indeed signs of a break-in at his home. From the start of the investigation, Michael, the troubled son of the Sears family, kept coming up in the case. His behavior was puzzling. Could he really have taken a hammer and then a baseball bat to nearly kill the neighbor before casually crossing the street to rob his own house? He was present at both crime scenes until the police arrived, which seemed very strange. However, given his issues with illegal substances, his actions were unpredictable. The police decided to interview each member of the Sears family individually to compare their statements for consistency. The family patriarch was away on a trip and could not be questioned. The first person interviewed was Christopher, the 19-year-old brother, who appeared very anxious. He explained that he had left home early that morning with their mother to go to work at the medical center and was far from home at the time of the crime. Christopher quickly began to point fingers at Michael, claiming that his brother, who struggled with addiction, often acted inappropriately and aggressively, which could have triggered the conflict. Christopher believed that Michael's substance abuse might have pushed him toward violent behavior. Next in the interrogation room was the suspect, Michael, who appeared unwell. He surprised the investigators by confessing to his banned substance addiction. Michael acknowledged that his addiction was harmful, and he expressed that he needed help because he couldn't manage it on his own. He also admitted to using substances on the same day as the interrogation. Desperate, he felt that he had no choice. If he didn't use, he would face withdrawal symptoms during his conversation with the detectives, making it impossible for him to speak. On the day of the crime, Michael left home early in the morning to look for a job at his father's suggestion, but he was unsuccessful. When he returned at 8:30, he found the back door of his house forced open, indicating a possible burglary. Surprised, he called his mother to inform her about the break-in. While waiting for her to arrive, he began to inspect the area around the house. During this time, a repairman showed up at the neighboring house. A few minutes later, police sirens were heard, and officers arrived on the scene. Because of this, Michael chose not to enter his house and instead waited outside, thinking the events were connected. At the crime scene, a patrolman asked Michael to show the soles of his shoes. A detective noticed a shard of glass lodged in the tread, which Michael could not explain. It was likely just a random piece of glass he stepped on while checking the area. Overall, he appeared clean and had no blood on him, but the police began to doubt his story. As a result, he became the main suspect in the murder case. Michael denied any involvement in the burglary or the murder of his neighbor. The police discovered that he had legal troubles and struggled with sobriety. They also learned that his mother planned to kick him out of the house due to her frustration with supporting him. This situation raised suspicions that he might have committed a crime out of desperation. The next person to be questioned was Christopher. He confirmed Michael's alibi with precise timing, stating that he saw Michael leave home for his part-time job. As a result, the police had to release Michael as a suspect. The younger children were not interrogated due to their age. During her questioning, Rebecca appeared upset and expressed concern about what had happened, asking about her friend's condition. However, her emotional response seemed insincere. Despite this, she had a strong alibi, She was at work during the time of the attack. While the investigation was still underway, another crime occurred just 36 hours after the murder. The victim this time was Rebecca Sears. One evening, as she was leaving her office, a dark-skinned man approached her with a weapon and demanded money. When she refused, he attacked her in the leg and threatened that next time he would attack her in the face if she didn't comply. Then fled the scene. Terrified, Rebecca called the police. Fortunately, her injuries were not life-threatening. In less than 3 days, 2 attempted robberies and murders had occurred, involving 2 families who were once close friends and neighbors. What had gone wrong in this quiet suburb? The detectives faced the difficult task of solving this complicated mystery. Meanwhile, the funeral for Laverne, who had been brutally murdered, took place. One of her friends spoke with the grieving widower, David, who appeared deeply affected by his loss and was openly crying. However, he made a remark that raised suspicion, saying he never would have wanted things to end this way. Some witnesses found his words sincere, while others thought they hinted at his possible involvement in the crime. With many rumors circulating about the 2 families, every statement from David became fodder for speculation. The police soon caught wind of this and began to view David as a potential suspect, as cases of spouses killing each other are not uncommon. However, the detectives lacked evidence against him, and David had a credible alibi. He was confirmed to be on a business trip in another state at the time of the murder. The investigator considered the possibility that he might have been involved in the murder, specifically as the organizer of the crime, by looking into details of his life. They called him in for questioning. He truthfully admitted to having an affair with his neighbor Rebecca, which his wife had recently discovered. Despite this, they chose not to divorce and instead decided to work through their issues together. They even started planning to move, which is why he had placed an advertisement to sell their house. The husband maintained that he was not involved in his wife's murder, stating that he loved her even though he was seeing the neighbor. Unexpected assistance in the investigation came from an unexpected source. The police station received a call from a prison inmate. He wanted to share information about the murder. He is Rebecca Sears' cousin. The inmate revealed that just before the incident, Rebecca had confided in him about her affair with David. She expressed concerns that her relationship was in danger because of David's wife, whom she viewed as a barrier to their happiness. Rebecca mentioned that she had tried to create tension between David and his wife by sending anonymous texts about his alleged infidelities, but those efforts had failed. Their marriage remained intact, and David's wife had forgiven him. David and Laverne was planning to relocate, which meant Rebecca risked losing David for good. She was deeply infatuated with him, and a phone call from David the day before the murder indicated that his feelings for her were strong as well. Rebecca viewed her former best friend Laverne as the rival she needed to confront, and she was determined to act to prevent David from moving away. In this context, she approached her cousin and asked if he knew any acquaintances with criminal backgrounds who could eliminate her rival for a significant payment and make it look like an accident to avoid suspicion. However, he refused to get involved in any criminal activity, and she left. Later, when he heard about the tragedy, he realized it might have been connected to Rebecca's earlier conversation. The police acted on this new lead. By this time, they had already discovered a love triangle involving the neighbors and suspected that either Laverne's husband or Rebecca could have killed her. They found this theory believable and began to verify the information they had gathered. At this point, Christopher was identified as a second suspect. He had a close relationship with his mother, Rebecca, who financially supported her sons, which gave her significant influence over them. It turned out that Rebecca was also funding Michael's banned substance use, as she had introduced him to illegal substances. However, Michael's relationship with their mother had recently become strained. The police continued to speak with Rebecca's cousin, who identified the murder weapon as a hammer. While it was known that a baseball bat belonged to the victim's son, The source of the hammer had been unclear until now. The cousin confirmed that he had seen the hammer in a toolbox in Rebecca's garage. Following this revelation, a wealth of incriminating evidence against the mastermind of the murder began to emerge. The detectives obtained a search warrant for Rebecca's SUV and discovered small bloodstains on the floor. Lab tests confirmed that the blood belonged to the victim. The investigators were now convinced that Rebecca was the mastermind behind the murder, with her son Christopher as the actual perpetrator. The final step was to piece together all the evidence and charge both individuals involved in the crime. Detectives brought Rebecca Sears back to the police station for further questioning. Unexpectedly, she confessed that she genuinely wanted Laverne dead because of her affection for Laverne's husband, David. She opened up about her affair with David and admitted that she had been sending messages to her former best friend, urging her to leave her marriage. Rebecca believed that by betraying Laverne, she could eliminate the only obstacle standing in the way of her happiness. However, Laverne was not willing to part ways, and Rebecca blamed her for the escalating situation. Rebecca claimed she never asked her son, Christopher, to kill Laverne. However, Christopher cared deeply for his mother, empathizing with her emotional struggles and her secret love. They had a close relationship, often discussing their feelings freely. Rebecca did not hide her pain from Christopher about not being able to be with David, and in a misguided attempt to help his mother, Christopher decided to eliminate David's wife for her sake. Christopher wanted to make his mother happy, and in return, she supported him with medications and even bought him a car. According to Rebecca's testimony, Christopher left home early in the morning and went to Laverne's house, where he confronted her. He broke the glass on the back door to enter while she was away. As she was dropping her son off at school, Christopher brought a hammer, waited for Laverne to return, and then attacked her. He initially used the baseball bat to hit her, but switched to using hammer for greater efficiency while she was lying on the ground. After the attack, Christopher called his mother to pick him up, and she arrived at the scene quickly. Rebecca noted that when he got into her car, he was covered in blood and claimed that the issue had been resolved. She was shocked and upset by what he had done, but instead of going to the police, she chose to help him. Christopher changed his clothes and disposed of the bloody ones. Later, Michael called to say that their home had been robbed. It turned out that Christopher had faked a burglary to make it seem like he was innocent. Additionally, Rebecca fabricated a story about an attack near her office, where she encourages Christopher to attack her leg. Rebecca made the story appear realistic to confuse the police, suggesting that someone was stalking their family. Ultimately, she claimed to be a victim in this situation and insisted that Christopher acted on his own when he killed Laverne. The police were appalled by the cynicism and cowardice displayed by Rebecca, who exploited her own son for her gain. The lead investigator, with 32 years of experience, had never witnessed such cruelty. On April 22, 2009, Rebecca and her son Christopher were arrested and charged with armed robbery and murder, both pleading not guilty. Remarkably, Rebecca testified against her son in court, claiming she knew the location of Christopher's bloody clothes. She intended to offer this information in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, as both she and her son were facing the death penalty in Georgia due to the severity of the crime. A plea deal was reached, and Rebecca indicated that the evidence was hidden in her mother's attic, which was later confirmed. Upon finding the clothes, investigators discovered drops of blood on them that belonged to the victim, Laverne. The townspeople were shocked to discover Rebecca's true character. Not only did she exploit her son for her own selfish purposes, but she also attempted to frame him to escape the death penalty. During the trial, more troubling information emerged. The owner of the clinic where Rebecca worked as a manager alleged that large amounts of money had been disappearing from the accounts since Rebecca started her job. An internal investigation confirmed that Rebecca had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars. While her son was wrongfully suspected, it was Rebecca who had been stealing from the company all along. Michael's accusation of theft was a result of his mother's actions, as she had once tried to implicate him. Thankfully, the situation was resolved, and he was not charged in the criminal case. In the murder case, both defendants accepted a plea deal to receive lighter sentences and avoid the death penalty. In May 2012, Rebecca Sears pleaded guilty to murder, armed robbery, and burglary. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murder, another life sentence for armed robbery, and an additional 20 years for burglary. The court ordered that these sentences be served consecutively, meaning she will never be released. She is currently in Lee Arrendale State Prison, Georgia. In the same month, Christopher, who also pleaded guilty, received a life sentence without parole for murder, another life sentence for armed robbery, and 20 years for burglary. Like his mother, Christopher Bowers will remain incarcerated indefinitely. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Leslie Reeves. On November 20, 2021, Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith met at a bar where Chris was performing as the lead singer of a band. After their initial meeting, Chris invited Leslie back to the bar for a friendly get-together. What started as a casual dinner quickly turned into something more, as they both felt a strong attraction to each other. They met again on November 24, 2021, just before Thanksgiving, at their favorite bar. The bar was packed, but they had made reservations. Those who were there that night remembered Chris and Leslie as a fun couple, full of laughter and conversation, with no signs of conflict between them. Leslie and Chris then got ready and went to his house. Leslie felt comfortable being alone with Chris, as he had made a positive impression on her. Additionally, Leslie was very good at defending herself, which made her feel safer when visiting him. Chris lived on a farm 100 kilometers away from the bar in Farmer City, Illinois, USA. At around 10 p.m., Leslie sent her friend Nanette Stuber a text message saying that something was wrong, but she did not provide any further details. Coincidentally, Nanette was asleep at the time and did not read the message until the next morning. This turned out to be the last message sent by Leslie Reeves. When Nanette woke up, she was eager to talk to Leslie about her date with Chris. Instead, she was alarmed to see Leslie's disturbing message. Nanette texted back asking what had happened, but Leslie did not respond and ignored all attempts to contact her. This lack of communication made Leslie's friend even more worried. Fortunately, Leslie had shared Chris's address, so Nanette decided to go there to check on her. She headed toward Farmer City while also calling the police. Knowing that the trip would take over an hour, she planned to request a welfare check on Leslie. As Nanette approached the farm, she saw another car parked nearby. It belonged to Chris's friend, who had been trying to contact the band's lead singer and wanted to check on him. They decided to explore the area around the house and look inside. As they approached from behind, they noticed that the door was broken and there was a shattered window. Looking inside, they saw a foot on the floor. Chris's friend quickly ran to his car, grabbed his phone, and called emergency services to report a dead body in the house. When the police arrived, they discovered even more heartbreaking scenes. Chris was the first to be brought out. He was alive but severely injured, covered in blood and struggling to breathe. Doctors feared he might not survive the trip to the hospital. The second victim, a woman who had accompanied him from the bar, was taken out. Chris was a local celebrity, the lead singer of a band. Forensic investigators and the sheriff began their work at the farm, while Nanette waited outside in her car. Confused and anxious, she tried to figure out what had happened to her friend, but no one would provide information about Leslie. Overcome with anxiety, Nanette went to the police to share vital information. She explained that the night before Thanksgiving, Leslie had gone on a date with a man named Chris, the first person to be taken from the house. When the police asked to see a photo of her friend, Nanette showed them the pictures on her phone. Then the police delivered the heartbreaking news Leslie had been shot and was dead. However, Chris was still alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the medical center for surgery. Although his condition had stabilized slightly, it was still serious. Police conducted a thorough search of the crime scene, Chris's car, and his personal belongings. They focused particularly on the communication equipment in the home. The scene revealed numerous damaged items, including a broken back door, shattered windows, and a displaced refrigerator. An overturned table and scattered chairs indicated a struggle. Initially, police believed that Chris had attacked Leslie in his own home, leading to a fight that left both of them injured. Leslie died almost instantly, making Chris a suspect. However, further investigation revealed that no weapon was found at the crime scene, which raised suspicions. It appeared that the attacker had been armed. The police concluded that Chris was unlikely to be the attacker, as neither Leslie nor Chris had weapons. Additional findings confirmed that Chris did not attack Leslie. A burned pizza was found, indicating that the couple had planned to cook and eat dinner together that evening before the attack. Evidence suggested that the attacker had come to their home, and that they had attempted to defend themselves. Chris was shot first while Leslie fought back. The chaos around her suggested a struggle. She had been shot once in the head, resulting in her death. Police discovered 2 silver bullet casings from a 9mm handgun, one in the kitchen near Chris's body and one in the living room next to Leslie's. To piece together what had happened, police began investigating Leslie and Chris's backgrounds. Chris Smith was a friendly 48-year-old man who had been divorced less than a year before the shooting. Chris worked in pool construction and also played music with his band. He was known in the community as a kind and dedicated person who devoted himself to singing. Almost everyone recognized him by name and face. He had no legal problems, no history of violence, drug use, or involvement in criminal activity. Leslie believed Chris would be the ideal partner for family life. At the time, Chris lived in a large house in a nearby town with his mother and sister. They described him as a workaholic, spending all of his free time focused on his career. The family was close and deeply saddened by what happened to Chris. They had a dog named Tiki, who doctors said played a key role in Chris's survival that night. During the 12 hours Chris bled out before he was discovered, Tiki lay on top of him, keeping him warm. Experts believe the dog sensed Chris's distress and helped him through the situation. Leslie Reeves, a 40-year-old mother of 2, lived about an hour south of Farmersville. She was divorced and had a master's degree in engineering. However, she chose a different path and became a Pilates and women's self-defense instructor. Leslie was very active and used her social media channels to promote her work. When the police asked about potential suspects in Leslie's attack, Nanette provided the most valuable information. Nanette knew Leslie well and recalled that one person who had acted inappropriately was her ex-boyfriend, Robert Tarr. Leslie had ended their relationship long before the attack, but Robert responded by stalking her. He became so persistent that she was forced to block him from her emails, text messages, and phone calls. Although Leslie tried to cut off contact, Robert refused to accept her decision. News of the crime spread throughout the area, eventually reaching a close friend of Leslie's who lived near the city. She confirmed what she had heard and identified Robert Tarr as the only person capable of carrying out such an attack. Leslie's close friend quickly contacted the police to report him, and suspicions against Robert continued to grow. Meanwhile, Chris remained in the hospital. X-rays showed that a bullet had entered his brain between the 2 hemispheres. If it had traveled just 2 mm deeper, he would have died. When his family learned of the incident, his mother and sisters rushed to the medical center to assist him. The trip took 2 hours, during which they were very worried about him. Chris's relationship with Leslie was short-lived and somewhat unexpected, so most of his relatives were unaware of it. While the doctors worked hard, they had to remove part of Chris's skull to access the soft tissues, remove some of the bone fragments that had penetrated his brain, and extract the bullet. It was time to meet Robert Tarr, a divorced father of 3 living in Collinsville. Thanks to Nanette, they were able to contact him and arrange a meeting. From the beginning, Robert did not question why the police were interested in him and agreed to come to the station without a lawyer. Although the deceased's best friend Leslie reported that she had broken up with Robert, he insisted that they were still together, although he admitted that their relationship had problems. Robert denied any involvement in the crime, stating that he had never been to Farmersville and did not know Chris Smith. When questioned about his alibi, he recounted his activities the day before Thanksgiving, claiming that he spent most of the day with a friend until 6:30 p.m., after which he returned home and met only his daughter. However, his alibi was not convincing. There were many holes in his story, and no one could confirm his whereabouts at certain times, making it seem as if he was trying to hide something. The shooting occurred at 1 a.m., while Robert insisted that he had been home long before. Robert's daughter, who was brought to the police station and partially supported his account, said that he had come home around 6:30 p.m., left, and returned around 9 p.m. Robert appeared very upset during questioning. He cried and said that he missed Leslie. His daughter was confused about the situation. The police believed he left to follow Leslie and saw her with a new man named Chris. He stayed with his daughter until she went to bed around 10 p.m. However, at around 2:45 a.m., Robert's daughter woke up to noises in the house. Robert was frantically doing laundry and kept saying he couldn't sleep, which raised suspicions. Robert's daughter also mentioned that her father owned a gun. While the two were at the police station, officers searched their home and discovered a gun. When they showed it to Robert's daughter, she realized that her father had used another gun just the day before. The police checked Robert's movements to verify his alibi. They found that he had filled up his gas tank at a gas station near Farmer about 15 to 20 minutes before the murder, and they obtained a receipt as evidence. Robert was caught on surveillance cameras at various locations as he traveled to the city. This evidence contradicted Robert's earlier claims that he had never heard of Farmersville and had never been there. He was eventually arrested after being caught lying, which allowed the police to detain him and prevent him from fleeing. Chris's family was relieved, as they feared the criminal might return to harm the survivor. Just a day after the arrest, more circumstantial evidence against Robert continued to emerge, and the police believed they had the right man. Robert's lawyer quickly appeared on television to discuss the case, asserting his client's innocence. Robert's story changed rapidly. He claimed that at 6:40 p.m., Leslie called him out of the blue, asking for a ride to a friend's house in Farmersville. He said he arrived at 7:30 p.m., dropped Leslie off near Chris's house, and then returned home. He explained his earlier lies by saying that he was afraid of attracting police attention. Robert claimed that he had simply picked up Leslie and left, insisting that he had not shot anyone. However, the timeline did not match his daughter's account. He stated that there was tension between his daughter and Leslie, so he did not want to worry her any further. In contrast, Robert's daughter described Leslie as a kind woman, and they quickly formed a close bond. Meanwhile, Robert's web of lies continued to grow. He attempted to challenge the police's theories while speaking to reporters, arguing that the police had found no glass or blood in the car he was driving, nor was there any other evidence linking him to the murders. Additionally, no DNA samples from the victims were found at the crime scene or in his car. Robert's defense attorneys used these points to support their case. The police desperately needed physical evidence. Ideally, a pistol containing the bullets used in the crime to conduct ballistics testing. Unfortunately, their initial search was unsuccessful. However, a few days later, Robert's daughter contacted the police, stating that she had found the gun he used in the attack. The weapon was safely stored in a thick Ziploc bag and hidden in the yard, possibly to prevent rain damage, suggesting that the perpetrator intended to use it again. The bag contained numerous fingerprints belonging to Robert, making the discovery significant to the investigation. Despite this evidence, Robert maintained his innocence and attempted to manipulate the facts. Although there were numerous fingerprints on the Ziploc bag, there were none on the gun itself, indicating that Robert had attempted to clean it. However, he was not clever enough to dispose of it. Further analysis revealed that he had not cleaned the gun properly, as tiny drops of Leslie's blood were found on it. To justify himself, Robert began telling a story that the gun actually belonged to Leslie, and that she had asked him to hide it. He claimed that Leslie had learned how to use a gun. However, her shooting instructor, a friend of Leslie's, refuted Robert's story, stating that he had never seen the weapon with her. Leslie's friend insisted that Leslie did not carry a gun for self-defense on that date. If she had had a gun with her, the attacker would not have been able to leave alive. She would have been able to defend herself. Despite everything, Robert maintains his innocence. The outcome depends on the survivor's memory. Chris Smith, the prosecution's main witness, survived the brutal attack but remains in a drug-induced coma. Doctors report some positive progress, but it is too early to make any predictions about his recovery. While waiting for Chris to regain consciousness, Robert's cellmate approached the police with a disturbing confession. He revealed that Robert tried to hire him as a hitman to kill Chris Smith and the chief prosecutor for $110,000, even paying $10,000 up front. In response, security at the hospital was increased. Investigations were conducted thoroughly, but no evidence supporting the attack was discovered. Robert claims that he never considered hiring a hitman. He stated that he gave $10,000, but it was to bail out a friend. However, this raises the question of why Robert would hand over such a large sum to someone he barely knew. Regardless, Robert's situation only worsened. To clarify the matter, they had to wait until Chris regained consciousness. Thankfully, he opened his eyes in early January 2022, about 2 months after the attack. This marked the beginning of his long recovery process. Chris had to relearn basic skills such as walking, eating, and talking. He approached the rehabilitation process with determination, demonstrating strong physical abilities from the start. Unfortunately, his cognitive recovery did not go smoothly. After waking from the coma, he faced significant memory gaps, especially regarding the night of the attack. He couldn't even remember who Leslie was, or recall anything about that evening. Additionally, Chris had to live with a bullet lodged in his brain. Doctors couldn't remove the bullet due to the risks involved. They found that attempting surgery could cause damage to the surrounding area, potentially leading to serious consequences. As he continued to deal with memory issues, Robert's trial was set for April 2024. At the start of the hearing, prosecutors claimed that Robert had intentionally gone to Chris's house to kill Leslie Reeves after seeing them together that evening. Evidence showed that he had been following Leslie throughout the night, suspecting she was with someone else. When he discovered that she was dating a new man, he became extremely angry. Police found numerous text messages between him and his best friend, in which Robert frequently expressed his frustration with Leslie, particularly that evening. It was evident that he was affected by the situation. Until the very end, he still believed he was in a relationship with her and viewed Leslie's date with Chris and their trip home as a betrayal. After witnessing how happy Leslie and Chris were together, Robert returned home, where his daughter found him crying. Knowing that the couple had gone to Farmersville, he grabbed a gun and went to Chris's house. Robert entered through the back door, but was quickly spotted, leading to an attempt to stop him. A struggle ensued, resulting in a broken window. Robert then armed himself. Leslie and Chris attempted to defend themselves by pushing the refrigerator to block their path. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Chris tried to shield Leslie but was shot, and shortly after, Leslie suffered the same fate. Robert's attorneys attempted to counter the prosecutor's claims. The defense emphasized the lack of direct evidence, portraying the case as a fabrication. They argued to the jury that the investigation was focused solely on accusing Robert of assaulting 2 people. In fact, there was no evidence at the crime scene directly linking Robert to the crime. Chris, a key witness, could not recall the events of that night and chose not to attend the trial, claiming that he did not remember anything. The prosecution's strongest evidence was a container found at Robert's home that held the bullets used in the attack on Leslie and Chris. Furthermore, Robert was responsible for packing and hiding the gun. He chose not to testify, which his attorney described as a strategic move. Additionally, the defense did not present any witnesses. After hearing the arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and reached a unanimous verdict, finding Robert Tarr guilty of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 85 years in prison, eligible for parole after 72 years, meaning he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. At this point, Chris finally took the stand in court and spoke about the impact the shooting had on him and his family. This tragic event completely destroyed Chris's life. At 49, he was never able to return to his beloved construction job. While he was in the hospital, his home was completely looted, and even his swimming pool was stolen. After his release, he auctioned off his home, which was later demolished, leaving only an empty lot. He now bore the responsibility of providing for his family. Friends and family remain hopeful that Chris Smith can rebuild his life, but there is a strong possibility that he will never be the same again. While waiting for his memory to improve, he practices every day and learns to do without assistance. Eventually, Chris regained his position as the lead singer in his band. However, the after-effects of that senseless attack continue to haunt him as he recovers. The left side of his body remains paralyzed, and he has sought help from a leading medical research center. Chris is eager to participate in advanced research to aid his recovery. He is currently writing a book about his experiences, focusing on domestic violence. Leslie's children are in the care of her ex-husband. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Noreen Boyle. John Boyle Jr. is a chiropractor in Mansfield, Ohio. He has a successful practice, which is considered one of the best in the state. John and his wife, Noreen Boyle, have been married for over 20 years and have 2 children. In 1989, their eldest son, Collier, turned 11. They also adopted a 3-year-old daughter from Taiwan named Elizabeth. Noreen was born into a working-class family in Philadelphia and worked as a dental hygienist. She supported John through his schooling in the early years of their marriage, but after Collier was born, she became a stay-at-home mom. Thanks to John's successful career, the family enjoys a comfortable life. Their children attend private schools, travel, shop, and experience the World Cup without financial worries. Although the couple appears to be a model family from the outside, John has a disturbing personality. He was often abusive to his wife and displayed controlling behavior. Furthermore, he was unfaithful. John frequently pursued relationships with other women, a fact known to his friends, family, and Noreen. For years, she tolerated his behavior in an attempt to preserve the marriage for the sake of their children, despite being aware of his infidelity and his constant pursuit of younger women. Whenever she confronted him about his affairs, he reacted violently. In general, John could not tolerate any criticism of himself. Noreen's son, Collier, also felt the effects of his father's behavior from a young age. However, this situation could not last forever. In December 1989, Noreen filed for divorce. John did not want to end their marriage because he was happy with his family life and relationships. In an attempt to save their marriage, he planned to move his family and private practice to Erie, Pennsylvania, nearly 2 hours away from their old home. Their situation was not as promising as he had hoped. John persuaded Noreen to stay for New Year's and to continue working on their problems afterward. The family celebrated the holidays at their old home, with John's mother in attendance. He asked his mother to babysit the children because he planned to leave again after midnight when everyone was in bed. Later, Noreen and John argued on New Year's Eve. Elizabeth, the youngest daughter in the family, was confused by the situation, and Collier was worried. John's mother put Collier to bed, and just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard Noreen's loud scream, followed by two thuds, as if something had hit the wall, and then silence. Afterward, someone walked around the house for a long time, even opening the door and standing in the doorway for a while. Collier was so frightened that he pretended to be asleep and stayed that way until morning. Despite his fear, 11-year-old Collier got out of bed early on January 1. When everything was quiet, he explored the house. His mother was missing, but John seemed to be either awake or not yet asleep. Collier asked his father where his mother was. John replied that she had left after their argument. He assured Collier that she would be back soon, and John's mother agreed with him. The boy waited for Noreen to return, but days passed without her. Shelley Bowden, Noreen's best friend, had been in close contact with her, especially during her divorce. Shelley was quick to criticize John's claims about Noreen's disappearance. She had planned to meet Noreen for lunch just after New Year's to discuss important matters, but Noreen never showed up and ignored her calls. This behavior was completely out of character for the Noreen she knew, and Shelley worried that something was wrong. Shelley repeatedly stressed that Noreen would never abandon her child under any circumstances. Out of concern, Shelley reported Noreen missing to the police. However, the police dismissed her concerns and reminded her that adults have the right to go wherever they want, without informing anyone. Shelley argued that Noreen was a responsible woman who would never leave her child, especially a 3-year-old who needed her. Collier picked up the phone book, found the police station number, and reported that something was wrong with his mother. The police responded quickly and went to Noreen's house. When they arrived, they immediately noticed that the boy looked scared and desperate for help. Unfortunately, they were unable to communicate effectively, but the police could see the fear in Collier's eyes, especially when he glanced at his father. When John asked the police who had contacted them, they did not reveal the truth, lying that one of Noreen's relatives had called. However, the police accepted John's explanation that she had simply left after an argument, and everyone believed it. Noreen was reported missing, and weeks passed without anyone questioning John's claim that she had left. However, Collier could not believe that his mother would abandon him. After hearing Noreen's relative's story, the police returned to Noreen's house. They searched every room thoroughly, but found no alarming evidence. Forensic experts examined the house and found no signs of foul play. Despite this, the police were able to speak to Collier, who recounted what he had heard on New Year's Eve, including Noreen's suspicious screams and banging on the walls. There was strong suspicion that John was involved in his wife's disappearance. Collier's sister, Elizabeth, who was 3 years old at the time, may have witnessed the incident. She told the police that she saw her father hit her mother on the head, then put her on the floor and wrapped her up like a snowman. However, due to her age, her testimony was not considered in the investigation. Soon after, a pregnant young woman named Sherry Lee Campbell moved into their home, replacing his wife. John claimed that Sherry was not pregnant with his child, and that they had only met after his wife had gone missing. He said that he had taken pity on Sherry and offered to let her stay. He also mentioned serious problems in his marriage and stated that Sherry would leave when his wife returned. While investigating the missing persons case, the police discovered revealing information about John's personal life. It turned out that his relationship with Sherry had been going on for much longer than he had admitted. There was a strong possibility that she was pregnant with his child, casting doubt on his story. Despite alarming details that raised suspicions, no concrete evidence was ever found, and Noreen remains missing. Furthermore, the theory that she ran away seems implausible. She had not made any purchases, used any credit cards, or contacted her children or relatives for weeks, which was highly suspicious. While examining the house and piecing together the events of Noreen's final days before her disappearance, the police learned that Noreen had been suffering from John's betrayal and infidelity for years. Sherry was the one having an affair with John, which drove Noreen away from her family. Sherry claimed that she only started dating John after his wife went missing, which was clearly untrue. Collier sought help because he was afraid of staying with his father, whom he believed was a murderer. While searching John's car, Collier discovered a photo of Sherry taken before New Year's. He considered showing it to the police. The photo was taken in front of a new house, so they decided to visit that location. Unfortunately, John refused to let them in, and they needed evidence to obtain a search warrant. More than 2 weeks after Noreen went missing, the police began to take the case more seriously, as her prolonged silence raised suspicions. Police discovered John's banking activities. They discovered that during the time Noreen was reported missing, John had made suspicious transactions. John rented a drill and purchased cleaning supplies from a hardware store, as well as quick-dry cement. He also frequently filled up gas in Erie, possibly during his visits to the new home. The investigation has now shifted its focus to the new house, as no evidence of a crime was found at the John family's old home. Collier said he noticed a ring on Sherry's finger that belonged to the boy's mother. He told his father this directly. The situation became more concerning when John told Collier that they were going to a neighboring state for fun the next day. He suggested a trip to a forest in the Highlands, which sounded very ominous and raised fears for the boy's safety. When the police arrived at the newly renovated house in Erie, it was clear that John had put a lot of effort into both the interior and exterior. However, the investigation focused on finding clues related to Noreen's disappearance and rescuing a boy from his father. The police searched the house meticulously, as such environments could hide bodies or evidence of a crime. The most intriguing discovery was in the basement. In a nearly empty room that was being renovated, they found a new carpet. When the rug was pulled back, they discovered a rectangle of freshly poured concrete. This anomaly caught the attention of the police, prompting them to investigate further by removing the concrete. While removing the concrete, they detected the smell of a decomposing human body. After completely removing the floor, they found a makeshift grave containing the body of a woman. Everyone immediately believed that this was Noreen's body. In the 3 weeks since her disappearance, the body had decomposed significantly. The condition of the body was so poor that dental records were needed for identification. Collier did not have to go with his father into the woods, where the boy could have been in danger. The police found the necessary evidence, ensuring that the boy was taken to Child Protective Services, where he would be safe. However, Noreen's tragic death was a huge shock to Collier. The boy had a deep bond with his mother. Noreen was not only his mother, but also his best friend. After discovering Noreen's body in her new home in Erie, the police found an expensive watch on her, which also served as a means of identification. Noreen's relatives noticed that her wedding ring was missing. According to a forensic expert, Noreen died between the night of December 31 and January 1. The police interviewed potential witnesses, especially neighbors who may have seen something unusual. A key witness was a man who lived next door and was awake from midnight to 4 a.m. on the night of the murder. He reported observing suspicious activity at John's house. Around 3 a.m., he saw John arrive with large bags. In the days that followed, John returned to the house frequently, working for hours and picking up heavy bags, which he then loaded into his car. The police suspected that the bags contained soil and construction debris, possibly related to the creation of a grave in the concrete floor. Interestingly, Sherry was wearing a ring that was identical to Noreen's missing ring. Collier could easily recall the ring his mother had worn, especially since there was a memorable story associated with the gift his mother had shared with him. This made him instantly recognize the ring on Sherry's hand. The police later learned that John had taken the ring from Noreen to give to his new partner, Sherry. Upon learning of this, Sherry was furious and immediately ended her relationship with John. The police then questioned John's mother, who had been with the children on the night of the incident. She claimed that she had not heard anything suspicious and vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Collier recalled an argument between his parents that he had heard before falling asleep. He was suddenly awakened by a terrifying scream and a loud bang on the wall, followed by silence. The police determined that John had inflicted a serious head injury on his wife. He then wrapped her head in a plastic bag, presumably to conceal any blood at the crime scene. John then went to check on his son, Collier. Collier vividly remembered his father standing in the doorway, staring at him. During this time, the boy pretended to be asleep, instinctively sensing danger. Collier now looks back on that moment with horror, wondering what his father might have done if he had realized that the boy was awake and had heard everything. Despite John's meticulous planning, he failed to create a credible story to explain his wife's disappearance. John cleaned the house thoroughly, leaving no forensic evidence of the crime. No traces of Noreen's DNA were found in the vehicle used to transport the body. Clearly, John was meticulous in his actions. When John struck his wife on the head, he avoided breaking the skin, resulting in no blood. He quickly covered her head with a bag, indicating intentionality. The pickup truck left no evidence, and not even the plastic bag covering her head left any fingerprints. Killers often leave traces on objects they forget to clean, but John was meticulous. He ensured that the entire crime scene was cleaned up after Noreen went missing. The police discovered circumstantial evidence. 2 days before his wife's death, John rented a drill, indicating that he was planning the murder. During the same period, he purchased cleaning supplies and quick-drying cement. John loaded his pickup truck with construction debris, waste, and soil, and drove to a location where he could dispose of it without restrictions. This decision turned out to be a serious mistake. When the police investigated and analyzed the debris, they confirmed that the concrete came from the basement of John's house. He had a motive to get rid of his troubled wife, Noreen, without going through a costly divorce. The investigation uncovered strong evidence against John, and Collier, who was only 12 years old, became a key witness. He understood that he would have to testify against his own father in court, which would greatly strengthen the prosecution's case. The prosecutor's office indicated that John could potentially face a prison sentence. For Collier, meanwhile, the situation posed difficult challenges. He struggled with the stigma of being known as the son of a murderer. Collier harbors resentment towards his father for taking away his mother through his terrible actions. John's defense team developed strategies to challenge the prosecution's case. They focused on undermining the prosecution's methods, arguing that many rules were ignored when interacting with child witnesses. Notably, no adults were present during many of the interviews, which the defense claimed was illegal. Furthermore, the defense believed that the police may have influenced the child to provide information that would incriminate his father in his mother's death, thus violating due process. John attempted to create a strong alibi to prove his innocence. He even convinced his brother to lie to the police, claiming that Noreen had called him. This made the investigation even more difficult for the police. The lie was exposed when it became clear that Noreen had died before that date. Despite this false testimony, John's brother did not face any charges. John's reputation as a successful chiropractor helped him maintain a positive image in the community. He was seen as a family man and a good father. He and Noreen had adopted a baby girl, and John was ready to have more children. At the time of the murder, Sherry Lee Campbell was pregnant and was able to prove that John was the father. Throughout the investigation, many questions arose about Sherry. Did she know about John's plan to kill his wife, or was she involved in the crime? These suspicions were fueled by her previous involvement in a real estate scam. A real estate broker reported seeing a young woman who looked like Sherry with Dr. John. However, the police found no evidence linking her to the crime or indicating that she knew about John's murderous intentions. She testified against him in court and cut off all contact with him afterward. Nevertheless, some people still believe that she may have had a role in the events that occurred. John's legal team presented their own arguments against the case. They identified errors in the autopsy report and even tried to argue that the body found in the basement was not Noreen's, but that of someone else who had been buried there earlier. However, the results of subsequent examinations confirmed that it was indeed Noreen's body, reinforcing the police's belief in John's guilt. As the jury deliberated, the atmosphere became tense. John Boyle Jr. was convicted of the premeditated murder of Noreen Boyle, and due to aggravating circumstances, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His lawyers subsequently appealed several times. In 2010, John requested a review of his sentence and sought clemency. Initially, the request was denied, but it was later granted, allowing him the opportunity for early release after 20 years. John's defense team continued to fight for him even after his 2020 parole hearing. For nearly 30 years he had denied killing his wife, but he eventually changed his story. John admitted to Noreen's death, but it was clear that he had been dishonest. His real intention was to have his sentence reduced and go free. He showed little remorse, claiming that he had pushed his wife in a fit of rage, causing her to accidentally fall and hit her head, resulting in her death. He refused to discuss other actions that suggested he had planned the crime. As a result, his request for parole was denied, and he remained in prison. John's family shunned Collier, and Noreen's relatives were unable to adopt the boy because they were too old. He was adopted by a caring family in Canada. As he grew older, Collier changed his last name. He initially worked as a magazine model before becoming a successful cameraman in Los Angeles. He eventually teamed up with a renowned director and produced a documentary in 2018 that recounted the story of his mother, Noreen Boyle's death, as well as his fight for freedom and the horror of his father's crimes. While making the film, Collier visited his father in prison nearly 30 years after John was convicted of murder. During their meeting, John claimed that he had accidentally killed his wife during an argument when she lunged at him with a knife, and he instinctively pushed her away. Collier did not believe his father's story, but chose to forgive him. Despite this, John still harbored resentment toward Collier and did not consider him part of his family. Just days before the most important law exam of her life, Lauren Teresa Giddings suddenly disappeared. No text messages, no calls, no sign that she had left home. Her apartment remained locked, her belongings intact, her car still in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be seen. The suspicious silence was just the beginning. Soon after, a strange smell emanated from the apartment building's trash can area. When police opened the black bag inside, all hope instantly vanished. It contained the body of a woman. From that moment, the peaceful apartment complex became the scene of a real nightmare. The most horrifying thing isn't just the body, but also someone in the crowd that day. Someone actively involved in the search for Lauren. Someone who appeared on television, looking panicked, and also the only one who refused police permission to search their apartment. Who had been stalking Lauren for months? Why were her apartment broken into without any sign of forced entry? And why did a seemingly harmless friend suddenly change his demeanor the moment news of the garbage bag was revealed? This story will lead you into one of the most chilling cases, where the villain can be closer than you imagine. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in Maryland. She had loving parents and two younger sisters with whom she was very close. From a young age, she had a strong religious belief and a desire to help others. Therefore, she decided to pursue a career as a prosecutor to protect those who couldn't afford legal fees. She attended Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, where she graduated with honors and served as president of the Student Law Club. During her time in university, she interned at a law firm in Atlanta and started a relationship with a man named David. After completing her studies, Lauren and David maintained a long-distance relationship, planning to get married once she graduated. In June 2011, she received her degree at 18 years old. But she still needed to prepare for her important bar exam. Lauren dedicated several weeks to study, taking a short break for her sister's wedding in Maryland. Returning to Georgia, Lauren attended a year-end party with fellow students and then informed her family that she would be focusing solely on exam preparation, requesting not to be disturbed. After that, she stopped communicating with anyone, and her friends and family initially assumed she was just busy studying. However, a few days later, on June 29th, her younger sister began to worry. She was on her honeymoon and frequently sent photos to Lauren. But Lauren wasn't opening those messages. This struck her as suspicious. Even knowing Lauren was studying for exams, her failure to check messages for several days straight seemed odd. She reached out to one of Lauren's friends and asked her to check in. The friend first tried to call but found Lauren's phone turned off. She then went to Lauren's apartment, which was located across from the university and primarily inhabited by students. The friend and her boyfriend arrived and found Lauren's car parked in the lot, but no one answered when they knocked. They had to use a spare key to get inside. The apartment was very messy, but there was a logical reason for that. Lauren planned to move in with David soon after, so there were bags and suitcases scattered everywhere. Although she wasn't there, her purse, phone, and laptop were still there. Everything was strange. No one knew where Lauren could have gone, leaving all her belongings and her car behind. Her friend contacted other acquaintances, and they immediately began searching for Lauren. They searched the campus and surrounding streets, but couldn't find her. As news of her disappearance spread, her relatives drove from Maryland to Georgia. Her friends continued searching but without luck, leading them to eventually contact the police. Officers arrived at the apartment complex and searched the apartment, finding no signs of forced entry or struggle. However, they agreed that Lauren's sudden disappearance was suspicious and called forensic experts. When luminol was sprayed to detect blood, they initially found nothing. But in the bathroom, it revealed a significant amount of blood in the bathtub. Based on this discovery, investigators suspected that Lauren might not be alive. As they concentrated on locating her body, one officer noticed a strong odor outside, which smelled like decomposition. Following the scent, he discovered it was emanating from a nearby garbage container. Upon inspecting, he found a large black bag containing a female torso. Although they couldn't identify the deceased due to the missing head, investigators were nearly certain it was Lauren. They decided to handle the situation carefully, withholding information about the remains to protect the investigation. The discovery of her body was the result of several unfortunate coincidences. Police officers arrived at the apartment complex just minutes before the garbage truck arrived to collect the containers. They parked their car in a way that prevented the garbage truck from accessing the area. Had this not happened, the remains could have been taken to the landfill, and it is likely that no one would have found them there. While waiting for confirmation of the deceased's identity and considering their next steps, investigators learned something noteworthy. Lauren's relatives informed the police that she had often complained about strange occurrences in her apartment, feeling as though someone was moving her belongings while she was out. There were no signs of forced entry, and her door was always locked. This situation lasted for a long time, making Lauren wonder if she was going crazy. She also sensed that someone was watching her, although she never actually saw anyone. To feel more secure, she purchased an anti-burglar device that locked the door from the inside. But the odd incidents continued. Just before she disappeared, Lauren expressed her concerns to her boyfriend, David, who reassured her that it was likely just pranksters and not a real threat. The police quickly checked David's alibi and confirmed that he had been out of state for several days, eliminating him as a suspect. Meanwhile, forensic technicians searched Lauren's apartment for fingerprints or evidence, but found that someone had cleaned thoroughly and washed all surfaces. They decided to remove the entire bathroom for lab analysis, hoping to uncover new leads through DNA testing. Medical experts confirmed that the torso found belonged to Lauren and officially classified the case as murder. They estimated that the murder had occurred around June 26, nearly 3 days before friends and family began searching for her. However, they could not determine the exact cause of death or find any signs of struggle. Although investigators tried to keep the information confidential, the incident attracted media attention to the apartment complex. Rumors quickly spread that police had found a body. Even though Lauren's family hadn't been informed yet, the investigators decided to interview all of Lauren's neighbors and inspect their apartments, in case one of them was the perpetrator. All residents, who were fellow university students, consented to the searches, except for one 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel, living in the adjacent apartment. Stephen refused to let the officers in, stating that as a law student, he valued his privacy and had nothing to hide. This raised suspicions among investigators. They discovered that Stephen had participated in the search for Lauren since the previous day and had spoken to journalists that same morning. He was a friend of Lauren's and attended the same classes as her. Lauren was the president of the Law Students Club, and Stephen was the vice president, meaning he knew her well but still opted not to allow police into his apartment. Meanwhile, Stephen remained actively involved in the apartment complex's activities. He followed police officers around, chatted with other residents, and even gave an interview to a local news station. During that interview, he recounted how he and Lauren's friends entered her apartment and helped search the neighborhood for her. Notably, he referred to her in the past tense, despite the fact that her body had not yet been publicly confirmed as discovered. When rumors emerged that the police had possibly found a body near the dumpsters, Stephen suddenly became quiet and noticeably changed his behavior, stopping his responses to questions. When asked if he was okay, he stated that he needed to sit down. He resumed answering questions but appeared genuinely shocked by the news of the body's discovery. After the journalists left, he remained in the same spot, staring blankly for several hours. Eventually, Stephen informed the police that he allowed them to search his apartment. Investigators first noticed an accumulation of various items in his apartment, including hoarded food, energy drinks, and weapons. However, they were particularly intrigued by a master key that could unlock all the doors in the apartment complex, as well as a spare key specifically for Lauren's apartment. Stephen confessed to breaking into several neighboring apartments while the residents were away. His confession led to his arrest for theft, and he was taken to the station for questioning. While searching his apartment, police discovered a saw package, which was concerning since the victim's limbs and head had been severed. Additionally, they found 2 USB drives containing illegal material involving minors and some women's underwear in his closet. A check of Stephen's computer revealed that he frequently accessed Lauren's social media accounts. He had viewed violent adult content and, according to the browsing history, had also opened her pictures at the same time. Furthermore, he had been active on a forum where he wrote stories about the murder and torture of women. One of his last internet searches was for the garbage collection schedule in their city. This accumulation of evidence led detectives to believe he was involved in the murder, suggesting he was obsessed with Lauren, especially since he had a key to her apartment and she had reported a break-in. However, there was still no direct evidence tying him to the crime. During the interrogation, the detectives tried to get Stephen to confess, but he behaved strangely. He only answered briefly and vaguely, like yes, no, and that he didn't know, which frustrated the detectives. They attempted to convince him that his DNA had been found at the crime scene, urging him to confess to reduce his potential punishment. As someone trained in law, Stephen was not swayed by their tactics. The detectives eventually left him alone in the interrogation room, where he sat for a long time, staring into space. After questioning, they asked him to remove his t-shirt to examine his body for recent injuries and noticed several scratches that might have been caused by fingernails. He claimed not to know how they got there and suggested he might have scratched himself while sleeping. Understanding he wouldn't confess, the police shifted their focus to gathering evidence. They meticulously searched the apartment complex and made a significant discovery in the maintenance room. They found a saw that matched the packaging from Stephen's apartment. Forensic experts determined that it had been cleaned, but they still found traces of human skin belonging to Lauren. The investigators traced the saw's purchase to a specific store and obtained surveillance footage from that day, confirming that Stephen had bought it. They also checked the maintenance worker's alibi, which cleared him for the day of Lauren's murder, leaving Stephen as the only person with a key to every door, including that of the maintenance room. Following this, investigators delved deeper into Stephen's character by speaking with acquaintances. They described him as reclusive and peculiar, yet highly intelligent. They recounted how he would often pose two unusual questions to new acquaintances: how they would survive a zombie apocalypse and how they would commit the perfect murder. This odd behavior left him with very few friends, and his fellow students had no interaction with him outside of university. Many people remarked that Lauren was the only one who attempted to build a friendly relationship with Stephen. Although his behavior was strange, she still tried to be nice to him. During the 3 years they lived next to each other, Stephen asked her out multiple times, but she always politely declined. He spent most of his free time at home, focusing on his studies. His windows were covered with curtains, and he never had guests over. After Stephen's arrest, police continued searching for evidence, but without success. They tried searching for Lauren's body but were also unsuccessful. However, they discovered a pair of women's underwear in Stephen's apartment, and testing confirmed it belonged to Lauren. Another shocking piece of evidence was found on a memory card in Stephen's apartment, a video showing him holding a stick with a camera attached to it up to Lauren's window just hours before she was murdered. This led all the investigators to believe Stephen was involved in the murder. A few weeks after being arrested, he was charged with 30 counts related to the possession of sensitive documents concerning children. While preparing for his trial, Stephen maintained his innocence, even as the prosecution planned to seek the death penalty. He hired a lawyer who had once taught Lauren, who argued that the police were framing Stephen and may have planted the evidence in his apartment. The lawyer also tried to persuade the judge not to impose the death penalty, as Lauren had previously opposed it. Nevertheless, the judge sided with the prosecution. The preparation for the trial dragged on for years, and the prosecution realized that with the current evidence, Stephen could avoid conviction. The death penalty required clear evidence, while the police evidence was indirect, allowing his lawyer to create doubt among the jury. Ultimately, the prosecution offered Stephen a plea deal. The charge of possessing minor-related material would be dropped, and the death penalty waived if he pleaded guilty and revealed the details of his crime. In 2014, 3 years after Lauren's death, he accepted the deal. According to Stephen, at 1:30 a.m., he dressed in black, including a mask and gloves, and entered Lauren's apartment with a key. He bypassed the security lock and watched her sleep for a bit. When the floor creaked, it woke Lauren, and she told him to leave. Instead, he attacked her, choking her as she tried to escape. After about 15 minutes, he believed she was dead. He moved her body to the bathroom and left it until the next day. The following evening, Stephen returned with tools, including a metal saw, and dismembered her body within hours. He packed the remains into plastic bags and disposed of them in various dumpsters near the university. He threw the torso into a dumpster next to an apartment building, hoping it would be picked up soon. Afterwards, he cut up his t-shirt, gloves, and mask and flushed them down the toilet. Stephen later claimed he didn't understand why he killed Lauren, saying he was confused afterward and thought she was still alive, which is why he participated in the search for her. However, the prosecution contended that Stephen was obsessed with her, citing his frequent visits to her social media and the video taken through her window. His forum posts and history of consuming violent content suggested he fantasized about causing harm to women. With Lauren set to move out soon, they believed Stephen may have decided to kill her, knowing he would never see her again. In any case, his confession was enough for a conviction, and he received a life sentence with the possibility of early release in 2041. 4 years later, Stephen filed an appeal, this time representing himself. He claimed that the police had violated his rights from the start of the investigation. During questioning, they yelled at him and denied him bathroom access without permission. Stephen also reported suffering a seizure due to the stress. The investigators, however, refused to allow doctors to examine him unless he consented to a search of his apartment. Additionally, he criticized his former lawyer for inadequate representation. The lawyer argued that Stephen had received a prison sentence with the possibility of a one-time release instead of facing the death penalty, which was quite favorable considering the nature of the crime. Nonetheless, his appeal was denied. In 2022, he tried appealing again but was unsuccessful yet again. Some of his relatives still believe he is innocent and was framed by the police. Stephen's father even created a website to fundraise for a new lawyer, but it failed to attract any donations and was quickly taken down. As a result, Stephen continues to serve his sentence. Despite this, he keeps appealing his conviction. However, many legal experts believe that he will not be released even after 2044 and will spend the rest of his life in prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Yu Young-chul. Yu Young-chul was born on April 18, 1970, into a poor family in Grovetown County, South Korea. He had a challenging childhood as he was bullied at school due to his family's low social status. This early experience of poverty is believed to have fueled his resentment toward wealthier individuals, as some of his future victims were affluent people. Yu and his siblings were abandoned by their mother at a young age. One day, their mother left them at their grandmother's house and never returned. The children were left to live in severe poverty with their elderly, ailing grandmother. Eventually, their father took them in and moved them to live with him and their new stepmother. However, the situation did not improve as their stepmother treated them cruelly. Tragedy struck again in 1985 when Yu's father died in a traffic accident. Determined to change his life, Yu resolved to work hard and find success to escape poverty. He enrolled in an art school, but his time there was difficult. He was rejected and ostracized by his fellow students, who regarded him as mediocre. In 1988, he decided to attend the technical school to earn any available qualifications. However, instead of focusing on his studies, Yu turned to a life of crime in an attempt to make money quickly. Unfortunately for him, his criminal endeavors were largely unsuccessful. At the age of 18, Yu was arrested for stealing from a wealthy neighbor. He was sent to a juvenile detention center, but the consequences didn't end there. Since he could no longer attend his technical school classes, he was expelled, marking the beginning of a downward spiral. Yu didn't stop stealing. His thefts escalated to more valuable items, including cash and eventually cars. In 1991, he was arrested again for stealing from his landlord. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in jail, giving him time to reflect on his actions. Despite his criminal record, his girlfriend, who worked as a masseuse, agreed to marry him, and they had a son together. However, instead of focusing on family life, Yu returned to stealing. He was caught stealing a car and sentenced to another 8 months in jail. Around the same time, Yu was diagnosed with epilepsy, leading to a brief stay in a medical facility before returning to his normal life. Interestingly, this epilepsy diagnosis would later become something he used to his advantage. Yu was no stranger to breaking the law for personal gain and had a history of similar crimes, which he regarded as only harming insurance companies. However, over time, he escalated from minor thefts to more serious offenses, becoming increasingly corrupt and unhinged. Yu served a 2-year prison sentence for illegally selling adult photos. Upon his release, he resumed stealing, eventually landing back in prison for another 3 years. Meanwhile, Yu's wife silently shouldered the responsibility of raising their son while he repeatedly committed theft and faced arrests. Her patience finally ran out in the year 2000 when he was accused of abusing a young girl and was subsequently sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. This prompted her to file for divorce. During the investigation and while Yu was in custody, she reported his cruel behavior towards her and his struggles with alcohol abuse. After his release in 2003, Yu embarked on a path of depravity and crime that would horrify the world and plunge the city into fear for years. During his time in prison, he became fascinated with Zhang Duyan, a murderer who killed 9 people between 1999 and 2000, primarily targeting wealthy individuals to commit theft driven by greed for accumulating wealth. You seem to identify with Zhang, sharing a deep resentment toward the rich, whom he blamed for his own misfortunes. Simultaneously, Yu developed profound animosity towards women following his divorce. This resentment, combined with his admiration for Zhang, fueled his hatred and destructive thoughts. He later expressed beliefs that women should not be escorts and that wealthy people should be held accountable for their privilege. After moving into his mother's house following his release, these twisted ideologies drove him further down the path toward the horrific crimes that would eventually earn him the title of the Cloaked Killer. Yu was granted permission to see his son, though these visits could have taken a much darker turn. Yu had devised a plan to exact revenge on his ex-wife in the most brutal way possible, intending to kill both her and their son. However, he ultimately admitted that he couldn't bring himself to follow through with it, leaving his wife and child unharmed. Instead, he shifted his focus to a new target: wealthy individuals. But before pursuing this goal, Yu decided he needed to practice killing, and he already had a plan for how to do so. Yu crafted his own weapon by modifying a large hammer, shortening its handle for convenience. Armed with this weapon, along with a knife and gloves, he prepared for what he called his revenge. To test his weapon, Yu began luring stray dogs into isolated areas of the woods and brutally attacking them. It's worth noting that many serial killers exhibit similar behaviors in their early years. By September 2003, Yu was just an ordinary man who had recently been released from prison and was savoring his newfound freedom. However, this freedom was short-lived. Within 2 weeks, he began executing his sinister plan, targeting a wealthy neighborhood. His first victim was identified quickly. Professor Lee Deok-soo, a wealthy man in his 70s, lived with his wife, Lee Eun-ok, in one of the elegant houses in the neighborhood. At 10 a.m., Yu forcefully entered their home, armed with his homemade hammer. He first struck Deok-soo in the neck before shifting his focus to Eun-ok, brutally striking her with the hammer until he was certain she was dead. Finally, he brought Deok-soo's life to an end. After committing the crime, Yu calmly cleaned the rooms, scrubbed away the blood, and walked out. However, he soon realized he had left his knife behind and returned to retrieve it. This time, when he broke into the house more aggressively and caused damage, he deliberately staged the scene to resemble a botched robbery in an attempt to mislead investigators. This plan ultimately backfired. When the police inspected the crime scene, they discovered footprints that later proved to be a significant clue. On October 9th, in another upscale neighborhood of Seoul, Yu, carrying the same weapons, broke into a wealthy family's home around noon. Inside, he encountered an 85-year-old woman named Kang Eun-sun and fatally stabbed her with a knife. Her screams caused her daughter-in-law, Lee Suk-jin, to rush into the room. Yu angrily demands that Suk-jin bow her head in defeat, but she firmly refuses and even threatens him in front of her husband and sons. Enraged, Yu reacted violently and killed her swiftly. Eun-sun's disabled nephew, Go Jin-soo, became Yu's next victim. Yu forced him to kneel and brutally beat him with a hammer, killing him mercilessly. This case revealed just how severely Yu's psychopathy had escalated. Evidence from this crime scene and previous ones caught the attention of the police, providing them with a crucial lead. Investigators launched a search through their database to identify the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Yu continued his violent spree, seemingly emboldened by his actions. His next target was a 60-year-old woman named Ju Jun-hee, who lived alone. You broke into her house and, upon encountering her, dragged her into the bathroom, where he savagely beat her nearly to death. Her son later discovered her barely alive, but she succumbed to her injuries despite paramedics' best efforts, dying half an hour after being found. Media outlets began reporting on strange deaths in the area, noting their geographic proximity and raising questions about whether the crimes were connected. Evidence from various crime scenes indicated similarities between the killings, making the connection increasingly apparent. Public fear grew, yet police initially denied any links between the murders. It would be several weeks before Yu's dark urges drove him to kill again. On November 4, 2003, he broke into a home in a wealthy neighborhood located in Gyeonggi Province. Inside, he confronted the housekeeper with a knife, threatening her to comply with his demands. Under duress, she led him to the owner's bedroom, where the 87-year-old homeowner, Kim Jong-suk, and a 1-year-old child, presumably her grandson, were present. But this time, Yu encountered a situation he had never faced before. As Yu rushed at Jong-suk with a hammer, the housekeeper grabbed the baby and attempted to escape through the door. Instead of attacking the child, Yu took him from her, carried him to another room, and left him there unharmed. Returning to the bedroom, he discovered the homeowner was dead and redirected his violence toward the housekeeper, who tragically lost her life in the attack. However, this time, he made a critical mistake. To cover his tracks, he resorted to his usual method of smashing property to make the scene appear like a failed robbery. However, he realized he had left blood traces on the safe door after cutting his finger while attempting to open it, a crucial lead for the police. If Yu's decision to spare the baby initially seemed to hint at a shred of humanity, his chilling actions afterward destroyed any such impression, leaving a trail of horror and disgust. Yu attempted to destroy evidence by setting the house on fire with the child still inside, then watched the flames consume parts of the home from a safe distance. Despite the intense fire that destroyed the bodies and the main bedroom, most of the house remained intact. Investigators were able to recover surviving CCTV footage, which offered them a glimpse of South Korea's new serial killer. The footage showed a man wearing a sweater he had taken from the house, likely to cover the bloodstains on his clothes. Although only visible from behind, the image provided a valuable lead for investigators. Police also discovered another set of shoe prints at the crime scene, further linking this murder to previous ones. Still, Yu continued his spree. While following his established pattern, he decided to deviate and seek change, which led him to his next victim. Yu, now posing as a police officer by obtaining a uniform, began extorting money from women working in escort services or the red light district. He excelled at this illegal activity, earning enough money to rent an apartment and maintain his reckless lifestyle. During this time, Yu started dating a woman from the escort services. His disdain for women deepened when she refused his proposal to live together after discovering his troubled past, including his previous marriage. This rejection marked a turning point for Yu, sparking his desire for revenge. On March 16, 2004, Yu returned to the streets with sinister intentions. Dressed as a police officer, he pretended to arrest a girl and took her to his apartment. This time, unlike his previous victims, he killed her by strangulation, fully revealing his deeply sadistic nature. Due to the inability to safely move the body out of the third floor, Yu decided to put it in a grocery bag and bury it near Sogang University. To ensure he wouldn't reuse the burial site, he marked the spot with a bottle cap. His next victim deviated from his usual pattern. After buying fake Viagra from a street vendor on Jae-sun but it doesn't work, Yu once again disguises himself as a police officer and arrests Jae-sun for selling illegal pharmaceuticals. Driving Jae-sun's personal van, he went to a secluded area and launched a brutal attack. He wounded Jae-sun in the head and neck, but Jae-sun fought back, injuring him in the process. Infuriated by the resistance, Yu struck back with a hammer, landing over 20 brutal blows to Jae-sun's head. Yu's blood was discovered in Jae-sun's van, forcing him to eliminate the evidence. He drove the van to a nearby parking lot under cover of night and set it on fire, destroying both the vehicle and the body inside. Following this event, you focused on targeting women working in escort services within the red light district. This marked the beginning of a brief but horrifying series of murders, resulting in the deaths of many people and leaving deep scars on the families affected by his violent actions. You changed his approach by luring women to his apartment, where he assaulted them individually before burying their bodies in various locations. To avoid burying in the same place, he marked each place with a bottle cap. He repeated this method with 9 victims. However, his lack of foresight ultimately led to his downfall. Suspicion arose when a massage parlor owner began noticing a pattern of unexplained disappearances. Several of the missing women worked for establishments owned by the same man. Strangely enough, family or friends are often unaware of these disappearances because many of these girls live independently, which makes them more likely to become targets of attacks. One day, the massage shop owner received a request from a man who wanted to use the services of a girl working at the shop. Further investigation revealed that the phone number belonged to one of the earlier missing victims. Alarmed, the owner contacted the police and worked with them to craft a plan aimed at capturing the perpetrator, suspecting that the women were being abducted and possibly trafficked. When the investigators sent an undercover employee to collaborate on the plan, the police prepared to apprehend the suspect, seemingly close to detaining you. However, you abruptly canceled the meeting and called the girl back. The reason? The girl's height played a key role. Many of you's victims had been forced into submissive positions, often kneeling, which indicated his preference for control. His targets were typically elderly individuals, vulnerable women, or escort service workers, chosen because they were easier to overpower. Encountering a taller girl made you feel less dominant, which prompted him to call off the meeting at the last minute. The police didn't give up. Shortly afterward, they identified the perfect undercover officer, and you took the bait. Before he could act, he was surrounded by police officers. During his arrest, you was seen desperately chewing something, later discovered to be business cards belonging to several women. During interrogation, he provided shocking information far beyond the expectations of the police. You was transferred to the Seoul Police Department, where investigators questioned him thoroughly about his activities. Although he denied any involvement in abducting or trafficking women, you ultimately confessed to multiple murders in affluent neighborhoods. He claimed to have killed more than 20 people, beginning with the Gangnam-gu murders and concluding with the murder of an escort worker just days before his arrest. Despite his confession, the police were skeptical and hesitant to believe his claims immediately, suspecting him of exaggerating to shock them. Whether you had fully planned his next move is unclear, but he exploited his epilepsy to stage a fake seizure. Remarkably, the officers believed him, removed his handcuffs, and left the door open, assuming he was too weak to pose any threat. This lapse in judgment allowed him to escape to his apartment, where he began destroying evidence. Within 12 hours, the police located you again and detained him, this time ensuring there was no opportunity for him to flee. During interrogations, you repeatedly changed his story. He eventually agreed to guide the police to the burial sites of his victims. During these crime scene investigations, he earned the nickname the Cloaked Killer because the police had to photograph the remains while you was draped in a yellow cloak, his face concealed behind a mask. The police department faced significant criticism for its handling of the case. You might never have been caught if not for the intervention of local massage parlor owners. He had openly stated that he intended to continue his acts of revenge until someone stopped him. During the trial, you attempted to attack the judge and then attempted to end his life while in custody, causing unnecessary delays in the trial process. Upon returning to court, he attempted to assault a spectator and showed no remorse toward the families of his victims. Eventually, Yu Young-chul was found guilty and received the maximum sentence. He is now on death row. Although South Korea has not carried out the death penalty since 1997, his appalling crimes and utter disregard for human life have sparked outrage across the nation. Even if the death penalty is not enforced, the public finds solace in knowing that you will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Stott family. In June 2013, the staff at a medical center in Springfield, Missouri, faced a challenging situation when they admitted 24-year-old Sarah Stott. She was in critical condition, losing consciousness and crying out in pain when she regained awareness. Doctors discovered she had a brain hemorrhage and kidney failure, causing her organs to function erratically. They struggled to understand her rapidly deteriorating state. The fight for Sarah's life lasted several days until they received an anonymous tip. The caller revealed that the Stott family had been plagued by mysterious illnesses for a year, which had already claimed the lives of Sarah's father, Mark, and her brother, Sean. Both had died without receiving medical care, and now it seemed Sarah was next. Fortunately, she was admitted to the medical center, giving her a chance at survival. The police began investigating the unusual illnesses affecting the Stott family, suspecting it was not just a coincidence. The family comprised 6 members: Mark, Diane, and their children Sean and 3 daughters Sarah, Rachel, and the 9-year-old girl. Mark Stott, born in St. Louis in 1951, he met Diane while studying in Texas. Despite their differences, they quickly found common interests and began dating. Mark was optimistic and artistic, performing in a band, while Diane was more reserved and introverted. Their relationship progressed rapidly, leading to an unplanned pregnancy, after which they decided to marry. Following the birth of Sean, Diane pursued her education, graduated from nursing school, and began working in a hospital's cardiology department. In contrast, Mark became a stay-at-home dad, managing household responsibilities and caring for the children. It appeared that Diane prioritized her career, striving to provide for the family. To seek better job opportunities, they relocated to Springfield, Missouri, a tranquil town ideal for raising children. This town was also Diane's hometown, conservative and religious, making her feel safe and secure. In the years that followed, they welcomed 3 daughters. To outsiders, they appeared to be the ideal family, but behind the appearance, they faced significant challenges. Sean, their son, struggled with health issues from a young age and was diagnosed with autism during his school years, which required special support. Despite the father's efforts, the daughters also experienced learning difficulties in school, particularly Sarah. The family's biggest challenge was financial. They simply did not have enough money to support their growing household. One income was insufficient to meet their needs, and they needed to find a new home because their current one lacked space. Mark occasionally helped the family's finances by taking on odd jobs, such as bartending. However, he primarily focused on caring for the children. In his free time, he pursued his passion for music, writing songs, and playing various instruments. He eventually began performing with a musical group, which generated some income, but it was still not enough for their large family. Despite their struggles, they seemed prepared to face their challenges together, until April 8, 2012, the day after Mark's birthday. In the family home lay the lifeless body of Mark. His wife reported that he had died from a mysterious illness resembling the flu, which progressed rapidly. She stayed by his side to comfort him, but despite her efforts, Mark's condition worsened significantly. His body even appeared unusual, with his skin taking on a yellowish tint. Diane mentioned that on the day Mark died, he experienced a seizure, something he had never had before. She attributed this to his age. When the seizure occurred, she wanted to take Mark to the hospital, but he insisted that he wanted to stay home and rest. Despite his wishes, she began preparing to leave. By the time she was ready, she found him unresponsive. 45 minutes after the seizure, she called emergency services. Upon a quick examination, nothing seemed suspicious, and the death certificate attributed his passing to natural causes related to his age. During this time, their son Sean was very concerned about his father's health. He documented all of Mark's symptoms on social media and questioned the natural causes of his death. Diane requested that her husband be cremated, and his ashes were scattered over a local lake near the church. Mark's death shocked everyone. He was a strong, healthy, making his sudden passing all the more puzzling. 5 months later, on September 2012, the police were called to another home for similar reasons. This larger house was more suitable for the family. Diane lived there with her children after selling their previous home and receiving an insurance payout following her husband's death. On that day, Diane found her 26-year-old son, Sean, dead in his room. His death mirrored the flu that had claimed his father's life. After her husband's passing, Diane became more proactive and took Sean to the doctor when he started showing symptoms. However, the doctors found nothing alarming, only a water imbalance. Despite Sean's worsening condition, Diane stopped taking him to the doctor, claiming he refused medical help and felt uncomfortable, which she attributed to his autism. The night before he died, Sean seemed to improve, leading Diane to believe that his mysterious illness was fading. She went to church with her daughters to pray for him. When they returned, they found Sean unresponsive, having apparently tried to get out of bed and fallen, leaving a pool of blood on the floor. His sudden death shocked everyone. Sean worked at a center for people with disabilities and was known for his positive and friendly nature. Like his father, Sean was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over a lake. About 9 months later, in June 2013, Sarah, the eldest daughter of the family, was hospitalized with symptoms similar to those that had caused the deaths of her brother and father. The police arrived at the hospital 2 days after Sarah was admitted in critical condition. While doctors were doing everything they could to save her, they could not provide the police with any specific information. They were still trying to identify the cause of her unusual illness, which resembled the flu, but it was concerning that both her kidneys and brain had failed. The medical staff conducted several tests, and there was an unspoken fear that Sarah might have been poisoned. The police were contacted by an anonymous caller from the church that the Stott family attended, where Diane had played the organ for many years. The pastor suspected that these events were not mere coincidences and feared that there was a murderer at work, so he decided to call the police. He shared his concerns that Mark's death and Sarah's worsening condition might be connected. The pastor found Mark's death particularly suspicious, noting that he had been healthy right before he died under similar circumstances. He was beginning to suspect Diane's involvement in these tragic incidents. During this time, Diane claimed that her daughter was simply ill while she acted like a grieving widow, a mother mourning loved ones who were dying under mysterious circumstances. This behavior helped her gain significant support from the religious community. However, the pastor suspected that Diane was deliberately maintaining this facade to avoid uncomfortable questions. When Diane last visited her daughter in the hospital, her behavior changed dramatically. The nurses noted that she was in a good mood. She joked and talked more about an upcoming trip to Florida than about her daughter's serious health issues, despite the doctor's alarming prognosis. They were uncertain if the girl would survive this mysterious illness. The mother's apparent indifference only heightened the authorities' suspicions against her. Diane was invited to voluntarily come to the police station for a discussion. On June 20, 2013, she arrived at the police department. By then, Sarah's condition had stabilized somewhat, but none of the medical tests revealed any toxins in her body. It appeared that any harmful substances had been completely processed and left no trace. The detectives knew they had to be very careful when speaking with a potential poisoner. Meanwhile, they couldn't perform many tests on Sarah due to her worsening condition. They continued to hope that Sarah would recover and provide information for the investigation. The detectives aimed to understand the events leading up to the victims' illnesses and gather clues about the causes of their deteriorating health. The situation was similar to what had happened with Sean. On that tragic day, Diane had gone to church with her other daughters, and upon returning home, she noticed that her eldest daughter, Sarah, was very ill. Prior to this, Sarah had been experiencing mild symptoms similar to those of her brother and father, so Diane did not panic initially. Diane believed they would be able to help Sarah when she returned home, and she eventually sent Sarah to the hospital. The first thing Diane questioned was whether her daughter had attempted to end her own life. Sarah had bipolar disorder, which meant she might have harmed herself. Diane reviewed all the medications available to her daughter and insisted that Sarah had tried to end her life multiple times in the past. It seemed as if Diane was desperately trying to persuade the police to believe her perspective. The officers did not inform Diane that they were also investigating the deaths of Mark and Sean, as they wanted to avoid alarming a potential suspect. During this time, Diane acted unusually. When responding to questions, she mentioned that Sarah had been a difficult child, was struggling to find work, and was not doing well in school, all while tuition bills were piling up. This seemed like an attempt to justify her actions, which felt out of place given that her daughter was fighting for her life in the hospital. Additionally, Diane expressed resentment toward her husband, who rarely worked and spent his free time on leisure activities. The detectives simply listened as she continued to share her thoughts and feelings. Diane acknowledged that she had always viewed Sarah as a problem because of her bipolar disorder. Despite this, Sarah continued to live with the family and had no intention of moving out. Diane revealed that for a long time, she even wished that Sarah would end her own life. Diane insisted multiple times that she did not harm her loved ones. Eventually, she made an unexpected confession to the detectives. She stated that her husband and children had been drinking antifreeze. This revelation was significant because antifreeze poisoning is very dangerous, and its symptoms can mimic those of various other chemicals, making it hard to identify. It leads to a slow and painful death. Diane confessed that she had even drunk antifreeze herself, having seen her family engage in it for some unknown reason. Of course, the detectives did not believe these absurd stories. Suspicions quickly started to be confirmed when they checked her browser search history. It turned out that well before Mark's death, she had begun searching for information on the signs and methods of poisoning, including antifreeze. She was clearly selecting the most effective and discreet means for murder, considering various medications, minerals, and essential oils that have a suppressive impact on the body. Several search queries were very provocative, for example, how to kill your husband, or how people with bipolar disorder commit and end one's own life. This indicated premeditated murder long before Mark died. When asked about all this during a follow-up meeting, Diane denied any guilt. She admitted that her husband's death did not happen as originally claimed. When the seizure occurred, she was sure that Mark would not be saved. According to Diane, she did this because she hated her husband. Everyone described the man as very good-natured. Probably, hatred stemmed from the couple's approach to the family budget. Diane simply could no longer handle the burdens at work, but she could never wait for her husband's help. She felt the same kind of hatred toward her son Sean. She could not bear to look at him. Sean was just seeking understanding and warmth from his mother, but instead, she just threw him out of the room. Every time Sean came in, he sensed that something was off, especially when he investigated his father's illness. When Mark died, she realized that she could no longer tolerate her ailing son, so she began to treat him badly every day. Diane claimed that it took only a couple of days for his body to succumb, but that was a lie. The boy was agonizingly dying for more than a week before he finally left this world. Now her attention and dissatisfaction focused on her eldest daughter, whom Diane considered the main problem in the family. Sarah was spending too much money on her education, but it was doomed to fail due to her lack of talent. Sarah dreamed of becoming a French translator, took out a student loan, and soon after graduating from college, she had to start repaying it, but there were no job prospects for Sarah, and her mother refused to pay her debts. Diane hated Sarah for not being able to find a job and solve her financial problems. For days before Sarah ended up in the hospital, her mother started adding antifreeze to her food. In the police station, Diane confessed that she sent her daughter to the hospital so quickly because she could no longer bear what was happening in her suffering. Naturally, Diane felt no pity. In reality, she had been preparing drinks in advance that were almost half antifreeze. Diane had stashed bottles of cola that could kill up to 30 people at once, according to experts. All of this was stored in the refrigerator to methodically poison her family, which seemed very alarming, especially considering that there were 2 other daughters in the house. However, Diane was not afraid that her younger daughter would accidentally take this drink, as she plans included the girl murder right after Sarah's. But to convict Diane, tangible evidence was needed. Despite the cremation of her husband and son, some fragments of Mark and Sean could still be found. After conducting autopsies, detectives suggested examining them to see if the deadly substance left traces in their bodies. Tests showed the presence of ethylene glycol, one of the main components of antifreeze. Before arresting the poisoner, the police decided to find out if she had an accomplice, as it would be difficult to carry out everything alone. It is hard to imagine how the suspect managed to keep all her close ones unaware of her intentions. The detectives arrested Diane without informing her and then questioned her second daughter, Rachel. They told Rachel that her mother had confessed to poisoning Sarah, which made Rachel extremely anxious. It was evident that she knew more than she was admitting. The detectives wanted to speak with Rachel to gain more insight into the family's situation. Even before Diane confessed, Rachel had been acting oddly, laughing and joking inappropriately about the deaths of family members, but she didn't confess to anything. As suspicions grew, the police repeatedly searched the Stott family home and discovered a diary belonging to Rachel, which proved to be highly informative. In one concerning entry, Rachel reflected that soon both her father and brother would die. She comforted herself with the thought of getting money and her father's car. Alarmingly, this entry was dated 6 months before Mark's death, indicating that Rachel was aware of her mother's troubling intentions and did not try to stop her or warn anyone. It appeared she was content with the idea of her entire family dying soon. When Rachel was shown the diary, she was clearly taken aback. She quickly broke down and admitted that she had been working with her mother, Diane, who was the poisoner, from the very start. Their collaboration began when Rachel assisted Diane in researching methods and poisons online. They discovered that antifreeze, which is sold in stores with a bitter additive to deter accidental consumption, could be purchased online for their malicious plan. Diane would prepare poisoned meals and drinks, which Rachel would then deliver to her father, brother, and even sister. In her confession, Rachel stated that they poisoned each family member up to 3 times a day. Rachel had the closest relationship with her mother and had always been the favored daughter. Just like Diane, who resented the others and viewed them as burdens. Together, they decided to eliminate the rest of the family and start a new life. A month after Mark's death, Rachel shocked her family's friends by posting on social media, "I think I haven't seen my mother so relaxed in a long time." This suggested that they were content with the outcome. Rachel shared that they had discussed each murder in detail and agreed that Mark needed to die. However, she was uncertain about Sean. She believed he didn't have to be killed and could instead be placed in a specialized treatment facility permanently. Rachel even argued with her mother about Sean, initially opposing the idea of his death but eventually conceding that it would be better to eliminate him. It seemed like a collaboration between mother and daughter in their plans. Rachel mentioned that she was surprised by Sarah's poisoning. She thought the reasons were not financial or related to deaths, but rather stemmed from a simple argument. Sarah often clashed with their mother, who found her very annoying. Regarding the 9-year-old girl, Rachel made vague remarks implying that the girl was also seen as a burden, which contributed to the desire to eliminate her as well. Diane was informed of Rachel's confession and encouraged to tell the complete truth. She agreed to do so. According to Diane, her resentment towards her husband began because he was emotionally distant and did not engage with her. She was also frustrated by his lavish spending and inability to support the family financially. Diane accused him of both physical and verbal abuse, as well as domestic violence, but these allegations were not corroborated by anyone who knew him well. In an attempt to defend herself, she claimed he had been unfaithful. However, none of Mark's close friends, whom he saw almost daily, supported these claims. Even Rachel's diary noted that their father was a devoted family man, suggesting he would harm himself before harming anyone else. Although Rachel and Diane expressed ongoing feelings of grievance, detectives believed the motive for the murders was more straightforward. Specifically, life insurance policies had been taken out on each family member, with benefits paid upon Mark's death. This would allow the widow to buy a larger, more comfortable home, marking the start of their deceptive plan. Rachel had also arranged other insurance policies that she intended to collect. Her diary revealed her concerns about the situation, which was closely examined during the hearings. Ultimately, Diane confessed that they had decided to take Sarah to the hospital while not doing the same for the other two victims because Rachel simply wanted to prevent anyone else from dying in the new house. They weren't worried about Sarah's passing. Instead, they viewed a dying loved one as a burden, just like the others. Rachel explained her behavior by sharing her deep anxieties related to her deceased brother. She vividly recalled the traumatic image of him lying on the floor, blood at his mouth, with cold, pale hands and glassy eyes. Following this, she moved into his room and often wrote in her diary about her heightened anxiety and the nightmares she experienced, in which Sean appeared. Both Rachel and Diane were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and they were denied bail. The Lutheran Redeemer Church attended by the Stott family issued a supportive statement on behalf of all parishioners during this challenging time. Interestingly, although the pastor had reported his suspicions to the police and initiated the letter of support, he continued to pray for their souls. Rachel accepted responsibility for her actions and agreed to testify against her mother, admitting to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of attempted second-degree murder. She received 2 life sentences but could apply for parole after 42 years. During her sentencing, Rachel apologized to her sister Sarah, who survived the poisoning and underwent extensive rehabilitation to learn to walk and talk again. Later, Rachel requested a reduction in her sentence, seeking a retrial. She claimed she was intimidated by her male attorney and had not been given a psychiatric evaluation, highlighting her mental health issues. However, her appeal was denied in 2018, and she did not pursue any further efforts to lessen her sentence. Diane Stott was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Throughout the trial, she used vague language and did not fully admit her guilt. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In one of her final interviews, Diane claimed she was not responsible for Mark's death, attributing it to his addiction to alcohol and banned substance. She stated that he had connections with dangerous people, which led to his suffering. At that time, she had such strong feelings of hatred toward her husband that she did not want to help him. When Mark died, she felt relieved. However, there was no evidence to support Diane's claims about Mark's dependency. Her new narrative contradicted diary entries and statements from Rachel, leading others to doubt her. Sarah's life changed forever due to severe poisoning, and she will never fully recover. She now resides in a special care center and has a guardian. Sarah dreams of her late father and brother, believing they are like guardian angels watching over her. She has forgiven her mother and sister and does not hold any resentment toward them. Her strong faith keeps her devoted, and she spends a lot of time in church. Sarah hopes to achieve her dreams of becoming a French translator and visiting Paris. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Megan Hargan. In 1983, Steve and Pamela Hargan welcomed their first daughter Megan, and 2 years later, their second daughter Ashley was born. Almost 8 years later, in 1993, they had another daughter, Helen. However, tensions within the family began to rise. Steve and Pamela started to argue, which ultimately led to their divorce while the girls were still young. Pamela received custody of the daughters, and soon after, she and the girls relocated to Potomac, Maryland. Pamela loves and cares for her daughters as well as for her work. She worked for a decade as a human resources manager before advancing to vice president at a large company. Neighbors noted that her daughters got along well and often played in their backyard with their pets. Due to her job requiring travel both domestically and internationally, eldest daughter Megan helped her mother raise her youngest sister Helen. Pamela's career peaked when her company merged with an international scientific applications corporation, resulting in a significant increase in her income. Despite this, she remained very diligent in her charity work and regularly donated part of her income to help people in difficult circumstances. She also provided generously for her family, ensuring her daughters had everything they wanted. Thanks to her professional success, Pamela was able to purchase a stunning property worth millions in a trendy area of Fairfax County, Virginia. The family's lifestyle was enviable, and Pamela took pride in her daughters, serving as a role model for others. However, they also faced envy from some. Beneath their seemingly perfect life, the family encountered common issues. As the girls grew older, a rivalry developed between them. Pamela noticed that Megan was facing the most difficulties due to her parents' divorce. This led her to develop feelings of jealousy and resentment towards her younger sister, Helen. She expressed her frustration by accusing their mother, Pamela, of favoring Helen. Her resentment deepened after Helen graduated high school and, like their mother, enrolled at the University of Dallas in 2014. At university, Helen became friends with a young woman named Erin. Initially, Erin viewed Helen as a modest and shy girl who rarely smiled. However, as they got to know each other better, they formed a close friendship. Erin discovered that Helen was actually a kind and sincere person dedicated to her studies. Despite her family's wealth and good standing, Helen took a part-time job as a waitress at a restaurant near the university. It was there that she met Carlos Gutierrez, a 30-year-old from Texas. They quickly started dating, becoming nearly inseparable. In 2017, Helen's middle sister, Ashley, got married at the age of 32 and moved out of the family home. Megan, the eldest sister, also married at 34 to Frank, a man from West Virginia, and they had a daughter named Molly. When Frank went to serve in the military, Pamela welcomed Megan and Molly into her home, allowing them to stay as long as needed. That same year, Helen graduated from university. Although she had intended to move in with Carlos, she returned to Pamela's home in Virginia, where her older sister Megan and 6-year-old niece Molly were living. At that point, Pamela was pleased with her accomplishments and, at 63, intended to retire. She decided to renovate a house she planned to buy for her youngest daughter, Helen, in Northern Virginia. This decision upset Megan, who had always felt that her mother favored her younger sister. Over time, the relationship between the sisters, Megan and Helen, became very strained. Tamara North, the sister of Pamela and the girl's aunt, later confirmed this. She noted that Megan harbored feelings of resentment towards Helen. Having cared for Helen since she was a child, Tamara observed that Megan was unwilling to acknowledge her younger sister. Unlike Ashley, Megan refused to help care for Helen from the moment she was born and would not play with her. Although the rivalry was clear, no one could have predicted that this mix of jealousy, envy, and later greed would lead to a tragic outcome. On the evening of July 14, 2017, the neighbors of Pamela quickly realized something was wrong when they saw the Fairfax County Police arriving at the estate. The emergency call had come from Carlos, Helen's boyfriend, who was in Dallas, Texas, and far from the scene. He expressed concern for Helen's well-being after she had called him with a strange story about a shooting. When the police arrived at the building, it was already too late. Upon inspecting the premises, they discovered the body of Pamela lying face down in the bathroom, covered with a blanket. It was evident that she had suffered a fatal head injury. Moving to the second floor of the spacious house, they found Helen in her bathroom. She was sitting on the toilet with a weapon between her legs and pointed upwards. It appeared that after killing her mother, Helen had ended her life by using her socked toe to pull the trigger after removing her shoe. As the investigation progressed, detectives realized that their initial hypothesis might not be correct. A family secret began to come to light. Officers secured the area around the house and interviewed neighbors. Detective Brian Byerson, who was leading the case, reached out to Steve, Pamela's ex-husband, to inform him of the tragic events. Overwhelmed with grief, Steve immediately called his other two daughters, Ashley and Megan. Megan, the oldest sister, said she was driving her daughter to West Virginia, but immediately turned around to go to her family's house. When Ashley and Megan arrived, Both sisters were in shock and crying while speaking with the police. They both believed that Helen had ended her life, especially Megan. She recalled that when she left the house at 1:30 p.m., with her daughter Pamela and Helen were angry. She noted that both Pamela and Helen were very upset. Helen was particularly distressed because their mother had stopped helping her buy a house. Pamela, their mother, disapproved of Helen's relationship with Carlos and did not want Helen to move in with him. Besides, Megan said that Helen had been feeling angry and depressed for the past few months. During questioning, Ashley confirmed that Helen had previously faced emotional issues and had once talked about self-harm. Ashley also mentioned that their mother, Pamela, suspected Helen of using banned substances and wanted to seek help for her. A weapon found next to Helen confirmed that it belonged to Megan's husband, Frank. He had brought the weapon to Pamela's house because he had seen two suspicious men nearby a few days before the tragedy occurred. He requested that the police examine Megan for gunpowder residue on her hands. This was particularly important because Carlos's earlier statement had led the police in a different direction in their investigation. To uncover the truth, they needed to gather all available evidence, regardless of how confusing or insignificant it might seem, until the full story emerged. After a thorough investigation that lasted over a year, the lab confirmed the presence of gunpowder residue on Megan's hands, indicating that she had recently used a weapon. An autopsy revealed that Pamela had been shot twice, while Helen had only suffered one bullet wound. However, it was determined that the path of this bullet to Helen's neck was at an angle inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. During the investigation at the scene, detectives noticed several unusual details. Pamela's phone was found on top of the blanket covering her, which seemed unnatural. Furthermore, no fingerprints were found on Helen's phone, despite the fact that she had called and texted Carlos before her death. There was also a small amount of blood on the weapon, raising suspicion since she should have had more blood if she had ended her life. This suggests that someone else pulled the trigger. Additionally, Megan's DNA was found in the bag with the weapon, which could be explained by her having brought the weapon into the house and handled it. Investigators discovered documents detailing Pamela's bank accounts and passwords, but these could not be used as evidence because they were not included in the search warrant. The day after the incident, Megan was allowed access to the property and belongings. When police conducted another search later, they included the albums and documents in their report, but they could not find them, indicating that someone had removed them. The strongest evidence against Megan, apart from Carlos's testimony and the police's suspicions, came from her own actions. Detectives found that just days before her mother and younger sister were killed, she was trying to buy a house for herself. She claimed she had her mother's financial help to close the deal, but in reality, she frequently changed jobs and had only $30 in her bank account. On the day of the murders, Megan needed to deposit over $400,000 to secure the purchase of her dream home. Court documents revealed that Megan was struggling financially and had tried to illegally transfer $420,000 from her mother's bank account, Pamela. Her plan was thwarted when Pamela's bank alerted her about the attempted transfer, prompting her to freeze the funds. This information was reported to the detectives by the finance department of the company, which became suspicious of the transaction and later learned about Pamela's death 5 days afterward. After the murder, Megan was called in for questioning again and was informed about the results of a fraudulent money withdrawal. Initially, she said that Pamela had wanted to transfer the funds. However, her story changed when investigators presented a recording of her conversation, and she admitted to calling the bank. Despite this, she continued to deny any involvement in her mother and younger sister's deaths. Investigators uncovered further evidence that Megan was responsible for the deaths of her mother and sister, and that she staged the incident to make it appear that Helen had killed their mother before ending her life. According to the investigators, Megan's motivation was jealousy. She felt that her mother favored her younger sister, which had troubled her throughout her life. When their wealthy and successful mother offered to buy Helen her own house, but refused to do the same for Megan, this left Megan feeling depressed and hopeless. Consumed by envy, resentment, and a desire for money, she was driven to commit these acts. The police believed that Megan had premeditated a double murder. 2 days before the incident, she spoke about suspicious men in their neighborhood, seemingly to explain the presence of the weapon in her home. Megan contacted the police to report the presence of strangers in the area. She also said that many other neighbors had similar concerns. On November 9, 2018, nearly a year and a half after Pamela and Helen's deaths, Megan was arrested at her new home in West Virginia, which she had purchased following the incident. The police held a morning press conference to announce her arrest. Detectives from the Serious Crimes Unit stated that Megan faced 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a weapon during the commission of the murders. Detective Brian Byerson reported that during a search of Megan's apartment, investigators uncovered crucial evidence, including a spreadsheet containing bank details and account passwords. These details were originally found in Pamela's house, but later vanished under mysterious circumstances. Megan has now appeared in court to face charges for the murders of her younger sister and mother. The final hearings in this controversial case occurred in March 2022. Alongside a significant amount of circumstantial evidence gathered by the prosecutors, one key factor in securing a conviction was the compelling testimony of Carlos Gutierrez. Carlos struggled to control his emotions as he continued his testimony. He explained that he asked Helen to leave the house, but she expressed concern for her niece Molly, who was also inside. Carlos could hear the fear in her voice over the phone, realizing how terrified she was in that moment. During subsequent calls, Helen mentioned that she could hear her mother, Pamela, dying. It seemed that Helen was following Carlos's advice to hide in a safe place, but when Carlos tried to reach her an hour later, she did not answer. Worried, he called 911 to report the situation. However, since he was in Texas, the operator informed him that they needed to contact local authorities first. After multiple calls to different numbers, Carlos finally managed to report that someone had died at the specified address and that he feared for Helen's safety. The prosecutor's office reported that Megan attacked Helen at 1 p.m. Around 1:15 p.m., Megan took Helen's phone and pretended to be her to reassure Carlos, claiming that she was fine. Ashley, the middle sister who was pregnant, also testified. She expressed regret that her son would grow up without knowing his grandmother and aunt, and that she could never have imagined that a killer was in their home. Megan's defense maintained that Helen was the one who killed Pamela and then ended her life, insisting that Megan was innocent. They argued that the police initially accepted this version, stating that Helen attacked their mother in the head after becoming upset when her mother changed her mind about buying her a house. After 13 days of trial, on March 28, 2022, Megan Hargan, who is 39 years old, was found guilty of murdering her mother, Pamela Hargan, and her younger sister, Helen Hargan, on July 14, 2017. The jury recommended a sentence of 20 years to life in prison for each murder. During the sentencing hearing in October, the judge sentenced Megan to 2 life terms in prison, following the jury's recommendations. However, on November 9, 2022, a judge overturned her double murder conviction due to juror misconduct. This decision was made after it was discovered that one juror attempted to recreate how Helen might have ended her life. The prosecutor announced plans to retry Megan for the crimes, and she remains in custody awaiting the new trial. In September 2023, Megan Hargan was tried and convicted a second time for the murder of her mother and younger sister. She was sentenced to life in prison in January 2024. After the verdict was announced, a trembling Megan leaned on her lawyer for support, while her younger sister Ashley burst into tears. Other family members of the Hargan family, present in the courtroom, embraced each other and wept after the trial. Ashley chose not to comment and preferred to keep her future plans private. Megan and her husband have divorced, and their daughter is now living with her father in West Virginia. This case highlights how jealousy and conflict among siblings can escalate if not addressed early. Such tensions can arise from minor issues and may grow into deep-seated animosity, threatening the bonds between children and parents. One peaceful afternoon in Florida, a 13-year-old girl walked into her home to find her 4 younger siblings screaming, crawling around in red stains on the floor. Small, bloody footprints all over the kitchen. There was no sign of forced entry. No goodbyes. Just 5 children, left alone beside their mother's body. And the killer who had vanished as if he had never existed. To understand why a mother became the target of such a vicious plan, we must go back many years to where the tragedy really began. Sheila Lee Walsh, born in Topeka, Kansas on October 19, 1962, met her first husband, Alan Blackthorne, shortly after finishing high school. Sheila was small, kind, and quiet. She had a difficult childhood. Her father, an Air Force pilot, was often away, and he died in Laos when she was only 10 years old. She longed for stability, for love, and for a family she could build with her own hands. After college, Sheila found work as an office administrator at a local law firm. That was where she met the charming, confident Alan, a man who quickly swept the inexperienced young woman off her feet. On their 3rd date, he proposed. Within 3 months, they married. Born in June 1955, Alan was 7 years older and, at least on the surface, far more worldly, but Alan's past held shadows Sheila never saw. Long before adulthood, he showed concerning behavior: cruelty toward animals, obsessive attitudes toward girls, even an accusation of attempted abuse while in high school. He had several minor criminal charges, but thanks to a string of lenient judges and expunged records, the man standing before Sheila looked clean, respectable, harmless. Alan easily gained the trust of Sheila's family. Even after the wedding, none of them suspected what was coming. Soon, he convinced them to invest a large sum into his electronics business, claiming he was preparing to expand. They had no idea the business was already failing. By the time the truth surfaced, Alan had declared bankruptcy and whisked his young, pregnant wife off to Hawaii, far from home, dependent and expecting a baby. Sheila found herself cornered, torn between her loyalty to her parents and the father of her unborn child. She still hasn't realized the cruelty of the man she has been with all her life. Years later, much would be revealed. Alan had been married before. His first wife, Eileen, endured extreme physical and psychological abuse, choking, beatings, even being kicked in the stomach while pregnant. Immediately after childbirth, Alan insisted they give the baby up for adoption because he wasn't ready to be a father. His violence extended beyond people. When their dog had an accident on the carpet, Alan beat the animal to death. Not only that, at one point, he forced situations where Eileen's younger brothers would witness intimate moments, and he often pressured her into degrading scenarios for his satisfaction. He also had a habit of dressing in women's lingerie before asking to be driven to rough neighborhoods, where he would wander home alone, a dangerous thrill he craved. Eileen and her husband had a bad marriage that lasted 5 years. During that time, she became pregnant again. Frightened, she decided to have an abortion and secretly began making plans to leave him. His second wife, Mary, initially believed she had met a loving, attentive father figure, but the facade shattered quickly. Alan used her 2 young children to manipulate and control her, threatening violence if she ever tried to leave. After 3 years of escalating intimidation, she fled with her children in the middle of the night. fortunate to escape the prolonged torment Eileen endured. Then came Sheila. When Alan met her, he saw vulnerability and opportunity. They married in 1982. Until that moment, Sheila had no way of knowing about his abusive past or hidden obsessions. At first, he was everything she thought she needed: loving, attentive, protective. But the mask slipped. Slowly, affection turned into criticism, criticism into anger, and anger into daily emotional warfare. Sheila was young, inexperienced, conditioned to believe that any outburst from the man she loved must somehow be her fault. And Alan, skilled in manipulation, took full advantage of that. The turning point came 6 months into the marriage, when Alan, with Sheila in the passenger seat, was involved in a collision with a motorcyclist. The rider died at the scene, and Alan immediately fled, terrified that witnesses had seen him. He phoned his father, who urged him to file a false report claiming he had been attacked by an aggressive stranger and had driven off only to protect his pregnant wife. Alan was eventually charged with fleeing the scene of a fatal accident and failing to render aid. But the case ended in a hung jury, and the district attorney declined to retry him. In the end, Alan walked away without consequences. Despite being responsible for the man's death, after the couple relocated, Alan resumed his attempts to revive his business ambitions. During that time, Sheila's sister visited and was alarmed by her appearance. Sheila was pregnant, but she looked shockingly frail, like the starving children often shown in charity campaigns of the 1,980 seconds. Sheila later admitted to her parents how grim things had become. Yet, despite everything, she had no intention of leaving her husband. Financial dependence kept her trapped. Alan was launching a new business selling electrical muscle stimulators. To secure support, he persuaded relatives to move with them to Honolulu. But in July 1985, the enterprise collapsed. Alan continued advertising the devices, but authorities arrested him and seized his inventory because he lacked the required permits and the machines failed certification. The incident erupted into a public scandal. After the business failed, Alan took Sheila back to California. There, Sheila confided more openly in her sister about what life in Honolulu had been like. Alan frequently insulted her, accused her of affairs, flaunted his own infidelities. He would bring other women into their home and have loud, intimate encounters within earshot of his wife and daughters. Sheila endured it all because she felt financially paralyzed. She had no savings, no support system, and had been isolated from her family. Back in the mainland United States, Alan again managed to attract investors for another business venture, once more involving muscle stimulation devices, this time medically approved. It was during this period that his cruelty escalated. Sheila's sister noticed that Sheila looked older, exhausted, and physically unwell. But alongside this decline came a flicker of resolve. For the first time, Sheila expressed a desire to leave him. A notion sparked after Alan tried to drown her by forcing her head into a toilet and flushing repeatedly. In September 1987, another attack occurred. Alan beat her with a belt before bed, then struck her repeatedly with his fists. Finally, Sheila called the police. Police arrested Alan, but the consequences were minimal, a fine rather than jail time. Sheila seized the chance to flee. She gathered her daughters and ran to the home of Janda, the family's former nanny. Unfortunately, Alan anticipated her escape and intercepted her there. While Janda hurried the children inside, Alan began beating Sheila. A neighbor witnessed the assault and rushed over, managing to drive Alan off. Furious, Alan climbed into Sheila's car, ran over the neighbor, smashed through a gate, then escaped in his own vehicle. He was arrested a few hours later. Miraculously, the neighbor survived with minor injuries. Alan received a $425 fine and 18 months of probation. Following Alan's arrest, Sheila fled with her daughters to Oregon to stay with her sister Carrie. She hid there for several weeks before realizing she could not live indefinitely in secrecy. She needed to face the legal process if she hoped to protect her children permanently. In October 1987, she wrote a detailed, 100-page account documenting years of Alan's abuse. By September 1988, the divorce was finalized in Sheila's favor. She received custody of their daughters, a vehicle, and $1,250 a month in child support. Later, Alan persuaded her to move to San Antonio, promising to buy her a home so she could live closer to the girls. Sheila eventually agreed, a decision she soon realized was a devastating mistake. Once she moved, Alan immediately began manipulating the children against their mother, and child support payments were routinely delayed. Sheila knew Alan had the financial means to pay. He simply chose not to. She had to take him to court for nearly every payment. Alan, obsessed with retaliation, studied family law constantly, searching for loopholes to use against her. He eventually succeeded in reducing the child support amount to $350 in a hearing Sheila hadn't even been notified of. That reduction forced her into further litigation. After additional hearings, the original support amount was reinstated, but each payment remained a battle, a deliberate torment Alan never stopped inflicting. Frustrated and desperate to receive compensation for the years of abuse she had endured, Sheila went back to court demanding her share of Alan's assets. But Alan was exceptionally skilled at hiding his money. Instead of the roughly $250,000 she was entitled to, Sheila received only about $22,000. Despite everything she had suffered, Sheila was determined to rebuild her life and create stability for her children. In August 1992, she met a gentle, soft-spoken man named Jamie Belush. Their relationship blossomed quickly. The two were married in June 1993. Jamie was a devout Christian, a former Marine, and an employee at a pharmaceutical company. Life finally seemed to be turning in Sheila's favor, but Alan was far from finished. He continued to look for new ways to torment his ex-wife. The day before Sheila and Jamie's wedding rehearsal dinner, Alan picked up the girls for a routine visit. Instead of returning them, he sent a bailiff to serve Sheila with yet another lawsuit, this time demanding expanded custody. Sheila and Jamie married the next day, but their honeymoon was overshadowed by the legal hearing that followed. As the girls grew older, around 8 or 9, Sheila began hearing troubling things from them. Her daughter, Stevie, eventually confided that Alan had touched her inappropriately. Sheila used this revelation as leverage. When Alan attempted to file another custody-related lawsuit, she informed him she was prepared to report him for molesting their daughter. Stevie's statement was formally recorded, but Sheila refused to make her daughter face the trauma again in court. The threat alone was enough. Alan backed down. From then on, all communication between them went strictly through attorneys. The children no longer wished to visit Alan, and meanwhile, Sheila began building a new life with Jamie. He wanted children of his own, but Sheila struggled to conceive. They turned to IVF, and in December 1995, Sheila gave birth to quadruplets, 3 boys and 1 girl. For a moment, the chaos of the past seemed finally behind her, yet danger continued to haunt her. When Sheila was 7 months pregnant, her sister Carrie came to visit. Just days earlier, the O.J. Simpson verdict had been announced. Hearing that Simpson had been acquitted of murdering his ex-wife terrified Sheila. She told Carrie she feared that if Simpson could get away with it, then Alan, who had spent years threatening, stalking, and tormenting her, might convince himself he could kill her too. Carrie tried to reassure her, but Sheila remained shaken. She even asked her sister to care for her children if anything ever happened to her, and to contact a woman named Enrule to share what she feared. By June 1997, Alan had filed yet another lawsuit, angry that Stevie had stopped visiting him. Sheila was prepared. She warned him plainly that if he pursued the case, She would report his inappropriate behavior toward their daughter. Realizing she was serious, Alan abruptly withdrew the lawsuit. Shortly afterward, he announced he wanted to terminate his parental rights altogether. Even so, he continued to stalk Sheila from a distance, and she believed he never stopped plotting revenge. Alan manipulated a neighbor into spying on her, convincing the woman that Sheila's children were being mistreated. The neighbor even installed enormous floodlights that shone directly into the Bellish family's bedroom every night. Sheila and Jamie complained repeatedly, but law enforcement did nothing. Eventually, the constant harassment drove them to make plans to move. One afternoon, while the nanny was watching the children, Sheila and Jamie returned home to discover that Daryl, Sheila's daughter from her first marriage, had visited her father. Despite losing all parental rights, Alan had still managed to see her. Sheila panicked, terrified he would discover where they were planning to relocate. In a moment of anger and fear, Sheila struck Daryl once with a belt. With Alan's encouragement, Daryl filed a domestic violence complaint, and because Alan no longer had legal rights to her, Daryl was immediately placed into protective custody while an investigation began. The court eventually found no evidence that Sheila or Jamie had abused or coerced their children. The family then quietly moved to Sarasota, Florida at night. But even there, peace was short-lived. A neighbor from Texas eventually revealed their new address to Alan. Daryl, still in state custody during the ongoing proceedings, remained a constant source of anxiety for Sheila and Jamie, who feared she might unintentionally disclose their location. The Bellishes were so cautious that even their closest friends back in San Antonio were told nothing more than a post office box number. During this period, Sheila's anxiety reached its peak. Even though she had been divorced from Alan for nearly 10 years, the fear that he might someday kill her never left her. And tragically, her fear wasn't irrational. Behind the scenes, Alan Blackthorne was actively trying to track her down. He first hired a private investigator to locate her. When that didn't work, he pressured the man into surveilling every Baptist church in the region, hoping to spot Sheila among the congregations. The task was unrealistic. There were simply too many churches, and the investigator eventually abandoned the effort. Alan then returned to the one vulnerable link he still had access to: Daryl, his daughter, who was in the custody of Child Protective Services due to ongoing court proceedings. Daryl was emotionally fragile and deeply conflicted, yet for months she managed not to reveal the Bellish family's new address, partly because she genuinely did not know it herself. But over time, Alan coaxed bits and pieces from her, small clues that slowly painted a picture, and once he had extracted the information he needed, he abruptly cut contact with her, ignoring her calls completely. Next, Alan used a ruse. He hired a man to deliver flowers to the general area Daryl had described. The delivery man went door to door at several houses, asking for Sheila. At one home, Jamie Bellush opened the door and casually accepted the bouquet, unknowingly confirming the correct address. The deliver flowers called Alan back with the details, unaware he had just become part of something far darker than a flower delivery. 13-year-old Stevie Bellish had never had a peaceful life, but everything reached its breaking point on the afternoon of November 7, 1997. She came home from school excited, ready to tell her mother she had been invited on her very first date. But the moment she reached the front steps, something felt wrong. The door was unlocked. Something Sheila never allowed. Inside, Stevie found her 4 younger siblings behaving strangely, screaming in a way she had never heard before. The children, all toddlers, were naked except for life jackets. It looked as if Sheila had been preparing to bathe them in the pool, a normal routine. But something had interrupted her. Stevie walked through the house calling for her mother, but heard nothing. She noticed what looked like red paint streaking her siblings' skin. But at 13, she still didn't fully grasp what she was seeing. Then she entered the living room and saw belongings scattered everywhere, signs of a violent struggle. In the kitchen, She saw clothes on the floor soaked in red. When she lifted them, her world broke open. Her mother, Sheila, lay beneath the pile. Stevie dialed 911, her voice shaking, and told the dispatcher that her 35-year-old mother was dead and that her throat had been cut. The dispatcher stayed on the line until the first officer arrived. The officer walked Stevie outside, where all 4 toddlers clung to her legs, covered in blood. When asked who could have done this, she answered instantly. She knew only one person who had ever wanted her mother dead: her biological father, Alan Blackthorne. Police soon learned that Sheila owned 20% of Alan's profitable medical equipment business, and that Alan owed her $7 million in court-ordered payments, money he had no intention of giving her. The financial motive was overwhelming, but investigators hit their first roadblock. Alan had an ironclad alibi. At the time of the murder, he was at a golf course in Texas. The medical examiner determined that Sheila had been dead for about 2 hours when Stevie found her. The killer first shot her in the face with a .45 caliber handgun. Little Tim, one of the quadruplets, was believed to have been clinging to her when she was attacked. The bullet entered her cheek, exited the back of her head, and sent her crashing to her knees so hard that bruises formed instantly. But she didn't die right away. Sheila somehow stood back up and staggered toward the wall phone. In the kitchen, bleeding heavily, she managed to dial 911, but never spoke, because the killer grabbed a butcher knife from its stand and slashed her throat repeatedly. Even then, Sheila fought. She had multiple defensive wounds, including one deep enough to expose the bone in her arm. The major veins on both sides of her neck were severed. Despite the severity of the wounds, the medical examiner concluded she could have survived if help had reached her in time. Instead, she collapsed on the kitchen floor while her 4 toddlers crawled through her blood, crying and screaming for a mother who could no longer respond. A single fingerprint was found in the dried blood, but it didn't match Alan's or anyone in the household. A broken, blood-stained knife lay next to her body. The crime was brutal. The scene was chaotic, and the killer had vanished. While questioning neighbors, police located the owner of a landscaping company mowing a yard near the Belush home. The landscaper told officers he had seen a white car he didn't recognize pull up to the house earlier that morning. Inside sat a large, intimidating-looking man. Frightened, the landscaper tried not to stare, but he memorized the license plate. When officers ran the tag, it traced back to a woman in Texas, the grandmother of 21-year-old Jose Del Toro. When detectives questioned Alan Blackthorne, he behaved coolly, even giving interviews to the media. He insisted he had only hit Sheila once in their marriage and called it the worst mistake of his life. As expected, he denied killing her and attempted to blame Daniel Alex Rocha, a friend who owned the golf course he frequented. However, his story quickly unraveled. When police reached Daniel, he revealed something far more disturbing. Alan had hired 27-year-old Samuel Gonzalez, first paying him $9,000. Soon after, Gonzalez brought in his 21-year-old cousin, Jose Del Toro, because Alan didn't want to get his own hands dirty. Jose, once a popular high school football star and prom queen's boyfriend, had long since fallen from grace. By 21, he was deep into banned substances and desperate for money. He had a few minor legal problems in the past, but he wasn't known to be violent. That changed when Blackthorne paid him to kill a woman, claiming she was abusing her children. Alan provided Jose with an old photograph of Sheila holding their daughter, taken during their marriage. Investigators later found this photo among Jose's belongings, but Blackthorne made a critical mistake. He hired a pair of unusually incompetent hitmen. Jose used his real identification to check into a motel near the Belush home. Surveillance footage captured him buying camouflage clothing. During interrogation, he crumbled quickly. Jose admitted sneaking into the garage and watching Sheila with her children, noting she seemed like a loving mother. Completely unlike the monster Alan had described, He claimed he almost backed out, but Alan pressured him relentlessly, insisting Sheila was dangerous, had to be dealt with. Even so, parts of Jose's story conflicted with evidence, making investigators doubt his version of events. Samuel Gonzalez, who introduced Alan to his cousin, Jose Luis del Toro, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in June 1998 and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Daniel Alex Rocha, 29, acted as the middleman connecting Alan with Samuel Gonzalez, was convicted in January 1999 of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole in February 1999. By the time authorities finally located Jose del Toro, he had already fled to Mexico. With financial help from Rocha, he fought extradition for more than a year. Jose del Toro was extradited to the United States in July 1999, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed burglary in 2000 in Florida. Judge Paul Logan sentenced Jose to 2 consecutive life terms, the maximum sentence for both charges. At sentencing, he cried and asked Jamie Bellish for forgiveness, vowing to expose everyone involved in Sheila's murder. There's one more important step left, and that's taking down the man who masterminded the entire affair, Alan Blackthorne. With relentless support from Sheila's sister and a team of attorneys, investigators spent 2 full years building the case. Witness after witness came forward describing Alan's long history of abuse toward Sheila and his previous wives. Searches uncovered alarming evidence. Alan and his new wife, Maureen, had been planning Sheila's murder for months. In their garage, investigators found a wall covered with photographs, notes, and a step-by-step plan. Shockingly, the couple seemed so confident in their impunity that they never bothered to remove any of it. During the investigation, Alan transferred nearly $50 million in assets into Maureen's accounts. Jamie Bellish filed 2 civil suits against them, totaling $38 million, and pursued legal action against others involved in the conspiracy. On January 4, 2000, 44-year-old Alan Blackthorne was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and several related offenses. Because he was considered a flight risk, bail was denied. At trial, his daughters Stevie and Daryl testified against him. Alan never once looked at them, showing no emotion, no acknowledgement, nothing. Prosecutors presented nearly 40 pieces of evidence proving a calculated plot to kill Sheila. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated only a few hours before returning a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts, Alan Blackthorne was convicted of federal charges of conspiracy to commit interstate murder and interstate domestic violence. He received 2 concurrent life sentences without parole. Beginning at the Beaumont, Texas, federal prison, following his conviction, Alan Blackthorne was transferred to federal prison, where he quickly became a target. Inmates attacked him several times, once stabbing him repeatedly, and in another assault, driving a sharpened screwdriver into his eye. Despite the brutality of these attacks, Alan survived. On November 18, 2014, at the age of 59, he died in federal custody in Terre Haute, Indiana. The official cause of death was never released, even within his own family. Reactions were cold and distant. His wife, Maureen Blackthorne, who had been convicted on financial charges in 2004, filed for divorce the following year. Meanwhile, Jamie Bellish took custody of the quadruplets as well as Stevie, Sheila's daughter from her first marriage, but forgiveness did not come easily. Jamie struggled deeply with resentment toward Daryl, who had once confronted Sheila with allegations of abuse and unwittingly revealed clues about the family's location, information Alan Blackthorne later exploited. Although Daryl had been manipulated as a child and never intended harm, Jamie found it difficult to separate her innocence from the catastrophic consequences that followed. In 2001, after years of legal battles, Alan's remaining assets, roughly $5 million, were finally unfrozen and distributed among Sheila's children. It offered financial security but could never replace what they had lost. In the months before her death, Sheila had confided in her sister, asking her to contact writer Anne Rule if the worst ever happened. Honoring that request, her sister reached out. Rule later included Sheila's case in her work, ensuring that her story and the brutality she endured would never be forgotten. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Heath Stocks. On January 17, 1997, a man in Lonoke, Arkansas, made what he calls one of the greatest mistakes of his life. 20-year-old Heath Stocks loved his family. One minute he arrived at his family home, the next minute he found his entire family dead on the living room floor. To this day, he claims that his mother and sister always supported him. Although he and his father had a tumultuous relationship, he maintains that they did not deserve to die. This is the story of Heath Stocks, Jack Walls, and the Boy Scouts of America. Lonoke, Arkansas is a quaint town that many would describe as the ideal American life. Like any small town, the residents were family-oriented, and their bonds were tight. The residents of Lonoke held their values close to their chests, and the town became a standout moral compass to those around it. Three of the most prevalent aspects of Lonoke were its dutiful church scene, appreciation for sports, and love for the Boy Scouts, along with their mantra, respect, honor, and obey. Much like many boys in America, Heath Stocks was a longtime member of the Boy Scouts, eventually reaching the coveted Eagle Scout status. His mother, Barbara, and his sister, Heather, shared a tight bond with him throughout his childhood. The only wedge in this seemingly perfect family life appeared to be his father, Joe. Heather was definitely his protector. She apparently felt very threatened by their father because Heath wasn't going to be the perfect child. Heath did typical kid things and made kid mistakes that were unacceptable to Joe. He struggled with learning disabilities and had ADHD, which affected his ability to get work done at school. Heath and his group had a favorite scoutmaster, Charles Jack Walls III, who was kind and doting. The boys under his care quickly formed a strong bond with Walls. Not only was he a respected father, but the Walls name was well known in Lonoke, thanks to his family's wealth and his father's work as a judge. Everyone wanted to be one of Walls's boys. Stocks himself said in an interview at the time that when people had problems with their boys, Walls always said he could put them in the Scouts and mold them into upstanding young men that their parents could be proud of. The use of the word mold in Stocks' recounting is particularly haunting, considering the context of his case. Walls was not just a guide, he was a leader, a great influence, a savior, as Stocks' grandmother put it. Now, that term drips with painful irony. The people of Lonoke, Arkansas, would look at Jack Walls and describe him as magic. He was a perfect citizen who encouraged young children to be the best they could be, a role model for all. To most, he was the ideal American citizen, the perfect person to look after their children. Unfortunately, that trust would be shattered in one of the most gruesome ways. For many parents of Scouts under Walls, he became a confidant for any issues or conflicts. The Scouts would report their worries to Walls, and in turn, their parents would seek advice from him. This allowed Walls to insert himself into the family dynamics of countless people. When their parents were not spending time with their children, Walls sometimes took on the role of teacher, introducing them to military skills as they shot guns and hunted. Other times, the topics veered into discussions about alcohol and adult magazine. Two of his Scouts, Doug Hogan and Mark McConnell, reported Walls' misconduct to their families in the summer of 1992. Cletus Hogan, Doug Hogan's father, had Jack Walls resign from the Boy Scouts of America after reporting the incident. However, when he turned the case over to the courts, Walls used his reputation and power within the Lonoke community to get the charges dismissed, slandering the Hogan as people who wanted a part of Walls' fortune. Doug Hogan, in turn, became a target for the other boys in the Scouts due to their growing protectiveness of Walls and their newfound skills in firearms. Heath Stocks was one of the boys groomed by Walls during this time. Behind the scenes, Walls began sowing discord between Stocks and Stocks' father, further establishing himself as a father figure in Stocks' life. Joe Stocks, Stocks' father, was distant and often physically disciplined him as a child, so Stocks turned to his trusted scout leader with his boyhood problems, further entrenching himself under Wall's control. When Stocks' mother, Barbara, discovered that he had been assaulted by Walls, she insisted that Stocks file charges against him. However, the charges all but disappeared by the time Stocks entered college. He sought Walls' approval for almost everything he did. Walls had firmly grasped control over Stocks' life, and the turmoil that Stocks experienced would soon come to a head. After Stocks took a weekend off from college, one horrifying day, Barbara walked in on Walls and Stocks together. She never blamed her son, nor did she attempt to interrogate him. She simply went to her pastor to seek advice on the terrifying situation. Stocks inevitably confided in his mother and sister Heather about what had been happening to him. This sent Walls into a frenzy and asked him to solve the problem. After years of insistence that Walls's protection was of the utmost importance, Stocks heard the order and obeyed. On the evening of January 17, 1997, Stocks went to his family home and ransacked it. His sister walked in just as he had his mouth around the barrel of a .45 caliber handgun. Their mother followed her soon after, and then their father seconds later. They were dead. Heath had taken the gun and shot them all. He had killed the problem as ordered. His entire family was dead, and as the courts would soon find, it was entirely his fault. Even if Walls was there to ensure the deed was done, it was Stocks who pulled the trigger. Stocks said he went back into the living room, got on his knees, and stuck his gun in his mouth. About that time, his mom came through, and he saw his dad's face. The next thing he knew, they're all dead. Stocks fled the scene and disposed of his gun in a nearby river. The other items were put inside a dumpster by a Pizza Hut in town. Stocks sought solace at the apartment of a college friend at Henderson State University, where police would find and arrest him at 6 a.m. the next day. Heath Stocks was charged with 3 counts of capital murder. Investigator Steve Finch led the Stocks family murder investigation and conducted several interviews with Stocks to determine the motive for the murders. It was then that Stocks reported the manipulation and abuse he suffered at the hands of his scoutmaster to the police. It was speculated that Walls was even present during the murders, and yet, when Stocks was arrested and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, Walls was not brought under investigation. No display of evidence, no calling of witnesses, and no defense whatsoever. The guilty plea, made at Walls's command, provided little reason or purpose. However, Walls would not remain innocent forever. Eventually, an investigation was launched against Walls thanks to the bravery of his own nephew, another victim of Walls. Like the other victims, Wade Knox had a strong relationship with his uncle. Knox joined the Boy Scouts because of Walls' influence and wanted Walls as his troop leader. He was also a part of Stocks' Boy Scout troop. There were many similarities between the young Stocks and Knox, from their upbringing to their personal difficulties, which Walls exploited like a parasite. Karen Knox said of her son, Knox was probably 6 or 7 when he joined the Boy Scouts. He became a Boy Scout because of Walls. Walls was his uncle and encouraged it. It was as normal as it could be. When Knox was 5, she noticed things about him that just weren't right. He had attention deficit issues, he was on medication, and then he was diagnosed with dyslexia. They knew it was going to be hard. By 3rd grade, things fell apart at school. Wade could no longer play sports or get along with anybody. He did not respect authority. It was just constant turmoil. Knox would get so upset that he would run away, and Walls would smooth everything over. They lived right across the street from Walls, and there were always scouts over there. Wade Knox, Walls' nephew, had been abused by his uncle since the age of 7. Reportedly, when Walls was out washing his car, Knox put a gun to Walls' head and forced Walls to confess to Wade's parents that he, his brother, and several other scouts, including Heath, had repeatedly abused by him. Later traumatized by the things Walls had done to him, Wade Knox committed to end his own life. His family started the Wade Knox Children's Advocacy Center in hopes that no other family would have to endure the turmoil they experienced. In hindsight, many people who view the case of the Stocks family murders speculate that Stocks did not act alone and that the trial was mishandled. Many believe that a guilty plea by Stocks would not have been submitted if proper action had been taken by the investigators. These claims, while lacking physical evidence, were supported by the then special prosecutor, Betty Dickey. Due to Wall's influence over the town, the victims' families were not going to file charges and simply allowed Walls to admit himself into a mental health facility. This changed as soon as they learned of the details of what Walls had done to their children. This was when Stocks admitted that Walls had ordered him to kill his parents, claiming Walls was present to ensure it was done. Though in later interviews, Stocks stated he did not remember if anyone else was in the house on the day he killed his family. Eventually, Walls was charged with 6 counts of abuse assault, no penalties in connection with the Stocks family case. He now serves 1 life sentence plus an additional 40 years. Betty Dickey remarked about the incident, "They were looking at 50 to 100 young boys over a period of 20 to 30 years that he'd molested." The reason only 6 counts were charged against Walls was due to the statute of limitations. In 2020, Heath Stocks was interviewed by Fox 16 about the murders and the abuse he suffered at the hands of Jack Walls. Surprisingly, he did not blame the Boy Scouts for the abuse, despite their recent bankruptcy and the abuse scandals that had emerged. He did not even blame Walls himself for his parents' deaths. Stocks claims he has forgiven Walls, mainly for his own mental health. Also asserting that although Walls was not responsible for pulling the trigger, he was the reason Stocks' mind had been warped enough to commit such a gruesome act. Stocks also places blame on his parents for insisting that he remain in the Boy Scouts despite several warning signs. Currently, Stocks remains in prison with a lifetime of incarceration ahead of him. If he had not been subjected to such thorough abuse in his childhood years, his family would still be alive today. Stocks had been a victim of gruesome crimes for years, which deteriorated his mental health until he hit rock bottom. 3 of the closest people in his life were dead due to his actions and the abuse of a powerful man. If Jack Walls had not taken the innocence of over 50 young Boy Scouts, much could have been saved and protected. His nephew, Wade Knox, would also be alive. Justice may have been served when Walls received his lifetime sentence, but there are questions that still remain unanswered.